Charlotte's Web by E.B. Weiss. Pictures by Garth Williams. Chapter 1. Before Breakfast. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mr. Arabah. "Some pigs were born last night. I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything. So your father has decided to do away with it." "Do away with it?" shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it just because it's smaller than the others?" Mrs. Arabah put a pitcher of cream on the table. "Don't yell, Fern," she said. "Your father is right. The pig will probably die anyway." Fern pushed her chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. "Please don't kill it," she sobbed. "It's unfair." Mr. Arabah stopped walking. "Fern," he said gently, "you will have to learn to control yourself." "Control myself?" yelled Fern. "This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself?" Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. "Fern," said Mr. Arabah, "I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along." "But it's unfair," cried Fern. "The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me?" Mr. Arabah smiled. "Certainly not," he said, looking down at his daughter with love. "But this is different. A little girl is one thing. A little runty pig is another." "I see no difference," replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. "This is the most terrible case of injustice I ever heard of." A queer look came over John Arabah's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. "All right," he said. "You go back to the house and I'll bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle like a baby. Then you will see what trouble a pig can be." When Mr. Arabah returned to the house half an hour later, he carried a curtain under his arm. Fern was upstairs changing her sneakers. The kitchen table was set for breakfast, and the room smelled of coffee, bacon, damp plaster, and wood smoke from the stove. "Put it in our chair," said Mrs. Arabah. Mr. Arabah set the curtain down at Fern's place. Then he walked to the sink and washed his hands and dried them on the roller towel. Fern came slowly down the stairs. Her eyes were wet from crying. As she approached her chair, the curtain wobbled, and there was a scratching noise. Fern looked at her father. Then she lifted the lid of the curtain. There inside, looking up at her, was a newborn pig. It was a white one. The morning light shone through its eyes, turning them pink. "It's yours," said Mr. Arabah, "saved from an untimely death. And may the good Lord forgive me for this foolishness." Fern couldn't take her eyes off the tiny pig. "Oh," she whispered. "Oh, look at him. He's absolutely perfect." She closed the curtain carefully. First she kissed her father and she kissed her mother. Then she opened the lid again, lifted the pig out, and held it against her cheek. At this moment, her brother Avery came into the room. Avery was 10. He was heavily armed with an air rifle in one hand, a wooden dagger in the other. "What's that?" he demanded. "What's Fern got?" "She's got a guest for breakfast, Mrs. Arabah," said Mrs. Arabah. "Wash your hands and face, Avery." "Let's see it," said Avery, setting his gun down. "You call that miserable thing a pig? That's a fine specimen of a pig. It's no bigger than a white rat." "Wash up and eat your breakfast, Avery," said his mother. "The school bus will be along in half an hour." "Can I have a pig too, Pop?" asked Avery. No, I only distribute pigs to early risers, said Mr. Araba. Fern was up at daylight, trying to rid the world of injustice. For a wizard, she now says a pig. A smart one, to be sure, but nevertheless a pig. It just shows that what can happen if a person gets out of bed promptly. Let's eat. But Fern couldn't eat until her pig had a drink of milk. Mrs. Araba found a baby nursing bottle and a rubber nipper. She poured warm milk into the bottle, fitted the nipper over the top, and handed it to Fern. Give him his breakfast, she said. A minute later, Fern was seated on the floor to the corner of the kitchen with her infant between her knees, teaching it to suck from the bottle. The pig, although tiny, had a good appetite and caught on quickly. The school bus honked from the road. Run! Commanded Mrs. Araba, taking the pig from Fern and slipping a donut into her hand. Avery grabbed his gun and another donut. The children ran out the road and climbed into the bus. Fern took no notice of the other in the bus. She just sat and stared out of the window, thinking what a blissful world it was, how lucky she was to have entire charge of a pig. By the time the bus reached the school, Fern has named her pet, selecting the most beautiful name she could think of. Its name is Berber, she whispered to herself. She was just thinking about the pig when the teacher said, Fern, what is the capital of Pennsylvania? Berber, replied Fern dreamily. The pupils giggled. Fern blushed. Chapter 2. Werber. Fern loved Werber more than anything. She loved to stroke him, to feed him, to put him to bed. Every morning, as soon as she got up, she warmed his milk, tied his bib on, and held the bottle for him. Every afternoon, when the school bus stopped in front of her house, she jumped out and ran to the kitchen to fix another bottle for him. She fed him again at supper time and again just before going to bed. Miss Sarah gave him a feeding around noontime each day. When Fern was away in school, Wilbur loved his milk, and he was never happier than when Fern was warming up a bottle for him. He would stand and gaze up at her and with adoring eyes. For the first few days of his life, Wilbur was allowed to live in a box near the stove of the kitchen. When Mrs. Araba complained, he had to move to a bigger box in the woodshed. At 2 weeks of age, he was moved outdoors in an apple blossom tree, and the days were getting warmer. Mr. Araba fixed a small yard specially for Wilbur under the apple tree, and gave him a large wooden box full of straw, with a doorway cut in it so he walked in and out as he pleased. Won't he be cold at night? Asked Fern. No, said her father. You watch and see what he does. Giving a bottle of milk, Fern sat down under the apple tree inside the yard. Wilbur ran to her, and she held a bottle for him while he sucked. When he had finished the last drop, he grunted and walked sleepily into the box. Fern peered through the door. Wilbur was poking a straw with his snout. In a short time, he had dug a tunnel in the straw. He crawled into the tunnel and disappeared from sight, completely covered with straw. Fern was enchanted. It relieved her mind to know that her baby would sleep covered up and would stay warm. Every morning after breakfast, Wilbur walked out to the road with Fern and waited with her till the bus came. She would wave goodbye to him, and he would stand and watch the bus until it vanished around a turn. While Fern was in school, Wilbur was shut up inside his yard. But as soon as she got home in the afternoon, she would take him out, and he would follow her around the place. If she went into the house, Wilbur went too. If she went upstairs, Wilbur would wait at the bottom step until she came down again. If she took her dog for a walk in a dark carriage, Wilbur followed along. Sometimes on these journeys, Wilbur would get tired, and Fern would pick him up and put him in his carriage alongside a dog. He liked this, and if he was very tired, he would close his eyes and go to sleep under the dog's blanket. He looked cute when his eyes were closed. Because his lashes were so long, the dogs would close their eyes too. And Fern would rear the carriage very slowly and smoothly so as not to wake her infants. One warm afternoon, Fern and Avery put up bathing suits and went down to the brook for a swim. Wilbur tagged along at Fern's heels. When she waded into the brook, Wilbur waded in with her. He found the water quite too cold for his liking. So while the children swam and played and splashed water at each other, Wilbur amused himself in the mud along the edge of the brook, where it was warm and moist and delightfully sticky and oozy. Every day was a happy day, and every night was peaceful. Wilbur was what farmers called a spring pig, which simply means he was born in springtime. When he was 5 weeks old, Mr. Arrowbar said he was now big enough to sell, and would have to be sold. Fern broke down and wept, but her father was firm about it. Wilbur's appetite had increased. He was beginning to eat scraps of food in addition to milk. Mr. Arrowbar was not willing to provide for him any longer. He had probably sold Wilbur's 10 brothers and sisters. "He's got to go, Fern," he said. "You have had your fun raising a baby pig, but Wilbur is not a baby any longer, and he has got to be sold." "Call up the Zuckermans," suggested Mrs. Arrowbar to Fern. "Your Uncle Homer sometimes raises a pig, and if Wilbur goes there to live, you can walk down the road and visit him as often as you like. How much money should I ask for him?" Fern wanted to know. "Well," said her father, "he's a run. Tell your Uncle Homer you've got a pig you'll sell for $6, and see what he says." It was soon arranged. Fern phoned and got her Aunt Edith, and her Aunt Edith hollered for Uncle Homer, and Uncle Homer came in from the barn and talked to Fern. When he heard that the price was only $6, he said he would buy the pig. Next day, Wilbur was taken from the home under the apple tree and went to live in the manure pile in the cellar of Zuckerman's barn. Chapter 3. Escape. The barn was very large. It was very old. It smelled of hay and it smelled of manure. It smelled of perspiration, of tired horses, and the wonderful sweet breath and patient cows. It often had a sort of peaceful smell, as though nothing had been happening ever since ever again in the world. It smelled of grain and of harness dressing and of axle grease and of rubber boots and of new rope. And whenever the cat was given a fish head to eat, the barn would smell of fish, but mostly it smelled of hay, for there was always hay in the great loaf up overhead. And there was always hay being pitched down to the cow and the horse and the sheep. The barn was pleasantly warm in winter when the animals spent most of their times indoors, and it was pleasantly cool in summer when the big doors stood wide open to the breeze. The barn had stars on the main floor for the work horses, tie-ups in the main floor for the cows, a sheepfold down below for the sheep, a pig pen down below Wilbur, and it was full of sorts of things that you find in barns: ladders, grindstones, pitchforks, monkey wrenches, sky pens, lawnmowers, snow shovels, axe handlers, mud pails, water buckets, empty grain sacks, and rusty rat traps. It was the kind of barn that swallows liked to build their nests in. It was the kind of barn that children liked to play in, and the whole thing was owned by Fern's uncle, Mr. Homer R. Zuckerman. Wilbur's new home was in the lower part of the barn, directly underneath the cows. Mr. Zuckerman knew that the manure pile is a good place to keep a young pig. Pigs need warmth, and it was warm and comfortable down there in the barn cellar on the south side. Fern came almost every day to visit him. She found an old milking store that had been discarded, and she placed the store to the sheepfold next to Wilbur's pen. Here she sat quietly during the long afternoons, thinking and listening and watching Wilbur. The sheep soon got to know her and trust her. So did the geese, who lived with the sheep. All the animals trusted her. She was so quiet and friendly. Mr. Zuckerman did not allow her to take Wilbur out, and he did not allow her to get into the pig pen, but he told Fern that she could sit on the floor and watch Wilbur as long as she wanted to. It made her happy just to be near the pig, and it made Wilbur happy to know that she was sitting there right outside his pen, but he had never had any fun. No walks, no rides, no swims. One afternoon in June, when Wilbur was almost 2 months old, he wandered out onto the small yard outside the barn. Fern had not arrived for her usual visit. Wilbur stood in the sun, feeling lonely and bored. "There's never anything to do around here," he thought. He walked slowly to the foot trough and sniffed to see if anything had been overlooked at lunch. He found a small strip of potato skins and ate it. His back itched, so he leaned against the fence and rubbed against the boards. When he was tired of this, he walked indoors, climbed to the top of the manure pile and sat down. He didn't feel like going to sleep. He didn't feel like digging. He was tired and standing still, tired of laying down. "I'm less than 2 months old, and I'm tired of living," he said. He walked out to the yard again. "When I'm out here," he said, "there's no place to go but in. When I'm indoors, there's no place to go but out, in the yard." "That's where you're wrong, my friend," said a voice. Wilbur looked through the fence and saw the goose standing there. "You don't have to stay in that dirty little yard," said the goose, who talked rather fast. "One of the boards is loose. Push it. Push on it. Push on it. And come on out." "What?" said Wilbur. Say it slower. Say it slower." At the risk of repeating myself," said the goose, "I suggest that you come on out. It's wonderful out here. Did you see a board was loose?" That I did," said the goose. Wilbur walked up to the fence and saw that the goose was right. One board was loose. He put his head down, shut his eyes, and pushed. The board gave way. In a minute he had squeaked through the fence and was standing in the long grass outside his yard. The goose chuckled. "How does it feel to be free?" she asked. "I like it," said Wilbur. "That is, I guess I like it." Actually, Wilbur felt queer to be outside his fence, with nothing between him to the big world. And the big world, "Where do you think I'd better go?" Anywhere you like," said the goose. "Go down through the orchard, root up the sod. Go down through the garden, dig up the radishes. Root up everything, eat grass, look for corn, look for oats, run all over, skip and dance, jump and prance. Go down through the orchard and store in the woods. The world is a wonderful place when you're young." "I can see that," replied Wilbur. He gave a jump in the air, twirled and ran a few steps, stopped, looked all around, sniffed the smell of afternoon, and then set off walking down through the orchard, pausing in the shade of an apple tree. He put his strong snout into the ground and began pushing, digging, and rooting. He felt very happy. He had plowed up quite a piece of ground before anyone noticed him. Mrs. Zuckerman was the first to see him. She saw him from the kitchen window, and she immediately shouted for the men. "Homer!" she cried. "Pig out, larvae! Pig out! Homer, larvae! Pig's out! He's down there under the apple tree." "Now the trouble starts," thought Wilbur. "Now I'll catch it." The goose heard the racket, and she too started hollering. Run, run, run down here! Make for the woods! She shouted at Wilbur. They'll never catch you in the woods. The cocker spaniel heard the commotion, and he ran from the barn to join the chase. Mr. Zuckerman heard, and he came down out to the machine shed where he was mending a tool. Lurvy, the hired man, heard the noise and came up from the asparagus patch where he was pulling weeds. Everyone walked towards Wilbur, and Wilbur didn't know what to do. The woods seemed a long way off. And anyway, he had never been down there in the woods and wasn't sure he would like it. Get around behind him, Lurvy, said Mr. Zuckerman, and drive him towards the barn. And take it easy. Don't rush him. I'll go and get a bucket of slops. The news of Wilbur's escape spread rapidly among the animals on the place. Whenever any creature broke loose of Zuckerman's farm, the event was of great interest to the others. The goose shouted to the nearest cow that Wilbur was free, and soon all the cows knew. Then one of the cows heard one of the sheep, and soon all the sheep knew. The lamb learned about it from their mothers. The horses in their stalls in the barn pricked up their ears when they heard the goose hollowing, and soon the horses had caught on to what was happening. Wilbur's out, they said. Every animal stirred and lifted its head and became excited to know that one of his friends had got free and was no longer penned up or tied fast. Wilbur didn't know what to do or which way to run. It seemed as though everybody was after him. If this is what it's like to be free, he thought, I believe I'd rather be penned up in my own yard. The cocker spaniel was sneaking up on him from one side. Lurvy, the hired man, was sneaking up from the other side, and Mr. Zuckerman stood ready to head him off if he started for the garden. And now Mr. Zuckerman was coming down towards him, carrying a pair. This is free offer, thought Wilbur. Why doesn't Fern come? He began to cry. The goose took command and began to give orders. Don't just stand there, Wilbur. Dodge out, cried the goose. Skip around, run towards me, slip in and out, in and out, in and out. Make for the woods, twist and turn. The cocker spaniel sprang for Wilbur's hind leg. Wilbur jumped and ran. Lurvy reached out and grabbed. Mrs. Zuckerman screamed at Lurvy. The goose cheered for Wilbur. Wilbur dodged between Lurvy's legs. Lurvy missed Wilbur and grabbed the spaniel and said, nicely done, cried the goose. Try it again. Run down here, suggested the cows. Run not towards me, yelled the gander. Run up here, cried the sheep. Turn and twist, honked the goose. Jump and dance, said the rooster. Look out for Lurvy, called the cows. Look out for Zuckerman, yelled the gander. Watch out for the dog, cried the sheep. Listen to me, screamed the goose. Poor Wilbur was dazed and frightened by the hula-buloo. He didn't like being the center of all this fuss. He tried to follow the instructions his friends were giving him. But he couldn't run down here and up at the same time. And he could run and twist when he was jumping and dancing. And he was crying so hard he could barely see anything that was happening. After all, Wilbur was a very young pig, not much more than a baby, really. He wished Fern were there to take him up in her arms and comfort him. When he looked up and saw Mr. Zuckerman standing quite close to him, holding a pair of warm slops, he felt relieved. He lifted his nose and sniffed. The smell was delicious. Warm milk, potato skins, wheat middlings, Kellogg's, cornflakes, and a popover left from the Zuckerman's breakfast. Come, pig, said Mr. Zuckerman, tapping the pair. Come, pig. Wilbur took a step towards the pair. No, said the goose. It's the old pear trick, Wilbur. Don't fall for it. He's trying to lure you back into captivity. He's appealing to your stomach. Wilbur didn't care. The food smelled appetizing. He took another step toward the pair. Pig, said Mr. Zuckerman in a kind voice. and began walking slowly toward the barnyard, looking all about him innocently, as if he didn't know that a little white pig was following along behind him. "Ruby, sorry, called the goose. Wilbur didn't care. He kept walking toward the pair of slops. "You will miss your freedom," honked the goose. "An hour of freedom is worth a pair of slops." Wilbur didn't care. When Mr. Zuckerman reached a pig pen, he climbed over the fence and poured the slops into the trough. Then he pulled the loose board away from the fence so that there was a wide hole for Wilbur to walk through. Reconsider, cried the goose. Wilbur paid no attention. He stepped through the fence into his yard. He walked to the trough and took a long drink of slops, sucking in the milk hungrily and chewing the pulp over. It was good to be home again. Some 8-penny nails had nailed. While Wilbur ate, Lurvy fetched a hammer and some 8-penny nails and nailed the board in place. When he and Mr. Zuckerman leaned lazily on the fence, and Mr. Zuckerman scratched Wilbur's back with a stick. "He's quite a pig," said Lurvy. "Yes, he'll make a good pig," said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur heard the words of praise. He felt the warm milk inside his stomach. He felt pleasant rubbing on the stick along his itchy back. He felt peaceful and happy and sleepy. This had been a tiring afternoon. It was still only about 4 o'clock, but Wilbur was ready for bed. "I'm really too young to go out into the world alone," he thought as he lay down. Chapter 4. Loneliness. The next day was rainy and dark. Rain fell onto the roof on the barn and dripped steadily from the caves. Rain fell in the barnyard and ran in crooked courses down into the lane where thistles and pigweed grew. Rain splattered against Mrs. Zuckerman's kitchen windows and came gushing out of the downspouts. Rain fell on the backs of the sheep and they grazed onto the meadow. When the sheep tired of standing in the rain, they walked slowly up the lane and into the fold. Rain upset Wilbur's plans. Wilbur had planned to go out this day and dig a new hole in his yard. He had other plans too. His plans for the day went something like this: breakfast at 6:30, skim milk, crusts, middlings, bits of donut, wheat cakes, and drops of maple syrup sticking to them, potato skins, leftover custard pudding with raisins and bits of shredded wheat. Breakfast would be finished at 7. From 7 to 8, Wilbur planned to have a talk with Temperton, the rat that lived under his drawer. Talking with Temperton was not the most interesting occupation in the world, but it was better than nothing. From 8 to 9, Wilbur planned to take a nap outdoors in the sun. From 9 to 11, he planned to dig a hole or trench, possibly find something good to eat buried in the dirt. From 11 to 12, the plan to stand still and watch flies on the boards, watch bees in the clover, and watch swallows in the air. 12 o'clock, lunchtime, middlings, warm water, apple parings, meat gravy, carrot scrapings, meat scraps, stale hominy, and the wrapper of a package of cheese. Lunch would be over at 1. From 1 to 2, Wilbur planned to sleep. From 2 to 3, he planned to scratch itchy places by rubbing against the fence. From 3 to 4, He planned to stand perfectly still and think of what it was like to be alive, and to wait for Fern. At 4 would come supper, skim mark, provender, leftover sandwich from Lurvy's lunchbox, prune skins, a morsel of things, a bit of that, fried potatoes, marmalade drippings, a little more of this, a little more of that, a piece of baked apple, a scrap of upside-down cake. Wilbur had gone to sleep thinking about these plans. He awoke at 6 and saw the rain, and it seemed as though he couldn't bear it. I get our beautifully planned out, and it has to go to rain. Has to go in rain, he said. For a while, he stood gloomily indoors. Then he walked to the door and looked out. Drops of rain struck in his face. His yard was cold and wet. His throat had an inch of rainwater in it. Temperton was nowhere to be seen. "Are you out there, Temperton?" called Wilbur. There was no answer. Suddenly Wilbur felt lonely and friendless. "One day, just like another," he groaned. "I'm very young. I have no real friends here in the barn. It's going to rain all morning and all afternoon, and Fern won't come in such bad weather. Oh, honestly," said Wilbur, and Wilbur was crying again for the second time in 2 days. At 6:30, Wilbur heard the banging of the pail. Lurvy was standing outside in the rain, stirring up breakfast. "Come on, pig," said Lurvy. Wilbur did not budge. Lurvy dumped the slops, scrapped the pail, and walked away. He noticed that something was wrong with the pig. Wilbur didn't want food. He wanted love. He wanted a friend, someone who would play with him. He mentioned this to the goose, who was sitting quietly in the corner of the sheepfold. "Will you come over and play with me?" "Sorry, Sonny, sorry," said the goose. "I'm sitting on my eggs. 8 of them. Gotta keep them toasty warm. I have to say right here, I'm not Flibberty Gibbet. I do not play when there are eggs to hatch. I'm expecting goslings." "Well, I didn't think you were expecting woodpeckers," said Wilbur bitterly. Wilbur next tried one of the lambs. "Will you please play with me?" he asked. "Certainly not," said the lamb. "In the first place, I cannot get into your pen, as I am not old enough to jump over the fence. In the second place, I am not interested in pigs. Pigs mean less than nothing to me." "What do you mean, less than nothing?" replied Wilbur. "I didn't think there is any such thing as less than nothing. Nothing is absolutely the limit of nothingness. It's the lowest you can go. It's the end of the line. How can something be less than nothing? If there was something was less than nothing, and nothing even thought, then nothing would be nothing. It would be something. Even though it's just a very little bit of something. But if nothing is nothing, then nothing has nothing that it's less than it is." "Oh, be quiet," said Lion. "Go play by yourself. I don't play with pigs." Sadly, Wilbur lay down and listened to the rain. Soon he saw the rat climbing down the slanting board that he used as a stairway. "Will you play with me, Temperton?" asked Wilbur. "Play?" said Temperton, twirling his whiskers. "Play? I hardly know the meaning of the word." "Well," said Wilbur, "it means have fun. To frolic, to run and skip and make merry." "I never do those things if I can avoid them," replied the rat sourly. "I prefer to spend my time eating, gnawing, spying, and hiding. I'm a glutton, but not a merry maker. Right now I am on my way to your throw to eat your breakfast. Since you have got sense enough to eat, haven't got sense enough to eat it yourself." And Temperton the rat crept stealthily along the wall and disappeared into the private tunnel that he had dug between the door and the throw with Wilbur's yard. Templeton was a crafty rat, and he had things pretty much his own way. The tunnel was an example of his skill and cunning. The tunnel enabled him to get from the barn to his hiding place under the pig throw without coming out into the open. He had tunnels that he had dug between the door and the throw in Wilbur's yard. Templeton was a crafty rat, and he had things pretty much his own way. The tunnel was an example of his skill and cunning. The tunnel enabled him to get from the barn to his hiding place under the pig throw without coming out into the open. He had tunnels with runways all over Mr. Zuckerman's farm, and could get from the one place to another without being seen. And usually he slept during the daytime and was bored only after dark. Wilbur watched him disappear into his tunnel. In a moment he saw the rat's sharp nose poke out from underneath the wooden throw. Cautiously, Templeton pulled himself up over the edge of the throw. This was almost more than Wilbur could stand on a dreary, rainy day, to see his breakfast being eaten by someone in a pouring rain. But even that didn't comfort him. Friendless, dejected, and hungry, he threw himself down in the manure and sobbed. Late that afternoon, Lurvy went to Mr. Zuckerman. "I think there's something wrong with that pig of yours. He hadn't touched his food. Give him 2 spoonsful of sulphur and a little molasses," said Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur couldn't believe what was happening to him when Lurvy caught him and forced the medicine down his throat. This was certainly the worst day of his life. He didn't know whether he could endure and offer loneliness anymore. Darkness settled over everything. Soon there were only shadows and the noises on the sheep chewing their cuts, and occasionally the rattle of the cow chain up overhead. You can imagine Wilbur's surprise when out of the darkness came a small voice he had never heard before. It sounded rather thin but pleasant. "Do you want a friend, Wilbur?" it said. "I'll be a friend to you. I've watched you all day and I like you." "But I can't see you," said Wilbur, jumping to his feet. "Where are you? And who are you?" "I'm right up here," said the voice. "Go to sleep. You'll see me in the morning." Chapter 5. Charlotte. The night seemed long. Wilbur's stomach was empty and his mind was full. And when your stomach is empty and your mind is full, it's always hard to sleep. A dozen of times during the night, Wilbur woke and stared into the blackness, listening to sounds and trying to figure out what time it was. A barn is never perfectly quiet. Even at midnight, there is absolutely something stirring. The first time he awoke, he heard Templeton gnawing a hole in the grain bin. Templeton's teeth scraped loudly against the wood and made quite a racket. "That crazy rat," thought Wilbur. "Why does he have to stay up all night, grinding his clashers and destroying people's property? Why can't he go to sleep like any decent animals?" The second time Wilbur woke, he heard the goose turning on her nest and chuckling to herself. "What time is it?" whispered Wilbur to the goose. Probably about 11:30, said the goose. "Why aren't you asleep, Wilbur?" "Too many things on my mind," said Wilbur. "Well," said the goose, "that's not my trouble. I have nothing at all in my mind, but I have too many things under my behind. Have you ever tried to sleep while sitting on 8 eggs?" "No," replied Wilbur. "I suppose it is uncomfortable." "How long does it take the goose egg to hatch?" Approximately 30 days are told. Unswear to the goose, answered the goose. But I cheated a little. On warm afternoons, I just put a little straw over the eggs and go out for a walk. Rupert yawned and went back to sleep. In his dreams, he heard again the voice say, "I'll be friends to you. Go to sleep. You'll see me in the morning." About half an hour before dawn, Rupert woke and listened. The barn was still dark. The sheep lay motionless. Even the goose was quiet. Overhead, on the main floor, nothing stirred. The cows were resting. The horses dozed. Temperton had quit work and gone off somewhere on an errand. The only sound was a slight scraping noise from the rooftop, where the weather vaning vane swung back and forth. Rupert loved the barn when it was like this, calm and quiet, waiting for light. Day is almost here, he thought. Through a small window, a faint gleam appeared. One by one, the stars went out. Rupert could see the goose a few feet away. She sat with head tucked under a wing. Then he could see the sheep and lamb, and the sky lightened. "Oh, beautiful day! It is here at last. Today I shall find my friend." Rupert looked everywhere. He searched his pen thoroughly. He examined the window ledge. Stared up thoroughly. He examined the window ledge, stared up at the ceiling, but he saw nothing new. Finally, he decided he would have to speak up. He hated to break the lovely stillness done by using his voice, but he couldn't think of any other way to locate this mysterious new friend who was nowhere to be seen. So Rupert cleared his throat. "Attention, please," he said in a loud, firm voice. "Will the party who addressed me at bedtime last night kindly make himself or herself known by giving an approximately sign or signal?" Rupert paused and listened. All the animals lifted their hands and stared at him. Rupert blushed, but he was determined to get the touch with his unknown friend. "Attention, please," he said. "I will repeat the message. Will the party who addressed me at bedtime last night kindly speak up? Please tell me where you are and if you are my friend." The sheep looked at each other in disgust. "Stop your nonsense, Rupert," said the oldest sheep. "If you have a new friend here, you are probably disturbing his rest. And the quickest way to spoil a friendship is to wake somebody up in the morning before it's ready." "He is ready. How can you be sure your friend is an early riser?" "I beg everyone's pardon," whispered Rupert. "I didn't mean to be objectionable." He lay down meekly in the manure, facing the door. He did not know it, but his friend was very near, and the older sheep was right. The friend was still asleep. Soon Lurvy appeared with slops for breakfast. Rupert rushed out and ate everything in a hurry and licked the throw. The sheep moved off down the lane, and Gander waddling along behind them, pulling grass. And then, just as Rupert was settling down for his morning nap, he heard again the thin voice that had addressed him the night before. "Salutations," the voice. Rupert jumped to his feet. What?" he cried. "Salutations," repeated the voice. "What are they? And what are you?" screamed Rupert. Please tell me where you are, and what are salutations?" "Salutations are greetings," said the voice. "When I say salutations, it's just my fancy way of saying hello or good morning. Actually, it's a silly expression, and I am surprised that I used it at all. As for my whereabouts, that's easy. Look up on the corner of the doorway. Here I am. Look, I'm waving. At last, Wilbur saw the creature that had spoken him in such a kindly way. Stretched across the upper part of the doorway was a big spider web, and hanging from the top of the web, head down, was a large gray spider. She was about the size of a gumdrop. She had 8 legs, and she was waving one at them at Wilbur in friendly greeting. "See me now?" she asked. "Oh, yes, indeed," said Wilbur. "Yes, indeed. How are you? Good evening. Salutations. Very pleased to meet you. What is your name, please? May I have your name?" "My name," said the spider, "is Charlotte." "Charlotte what?" asked Wilbur eagerly. "Charlotte a Cavatica. But just call me Charlotte." "I think you're beautiful," said Wilbur. "Well, I am pretty," replied Charlotte. "There's no denying that. Our star spiders are rather nice looking. I'm not as flashy as some, but I'll do." "I wish I could see you, Wilbur, as clearly as you can see me." "Why can't you?" asked the pig. "I'm right here." "Yes, but I'm nearsighted," replied Charlotte. "I've always been dreadfully nearsighted. It's good in some ways, not so good in others. Watch me wrap up this fly." A fly that had been crawling along Wilbur's throat has flown up and blundered into the lower part of Charlotte's web and was tangled in the sticky threads. The fly was beating its wings furiously, trying to break loose and free itself. "First," said Charlotte, "I dive at him." She plunged headfirst towards the fly. As he dropped, a tiny silken thread unwound from her rear end. "Next, I wrap him up." She grabbed the fly, threw a few threads of silk around it, and rolled it over and over, wrapping it so that it couldn't move. Wilbur watched in horror. He could hardly believe what he was seeing, and although he detested flies, he was sorry for this one. "There," said Charlotte. "Now I knocked him out, so he'll be more comfortable." She bit the fly. "He can't fear a thing now," she remarked. "You'll make a perfect breakfast for me." "You mean you eat flies?" gasped Wilbur. "Certainly. Flies, bugs, grasshoppers, choice beetles, moths, butterflies, tasty cockroaches, gnats, midgets, daddy longlegs, centipedes, mosquitoes, crickets, anything that is careless enough to caught up in my web. I have to live, don't I?" "Why, yes, of course," said Wilbur. "Do you taste good?" "Do they taste good?" "Delicious, of course. I don't really eat them. I drink them. Drink their blood. I love blood," said Charlotte, and her pleasant thin voice grew even thinner and more pleasant. "Don't say that," groaned Wilbur. "Please don't say things like that." "Why not? It's true. And I have to say what is true. I am not entirely happy about my diet of flies and bugs, but it's the way I'm made. A spider has to pick up living somehow or another, and I happen to be the trapper. I just naturally build a web and traps flies and other insects. My mother was a trapper before me. My mother was a trapper before her. All our family have been trappers, way back for thousands and thousands of years. We spiders have been laying for us flies and bugs. It's a miserable inheritance," said Wilbur gloomily. He was sad because his new friend was so bloodthirsty. "Yes, it is," agreed Charlotte, "but I can't help it. I don't know how the first spider in the early days of the world happened to think up this fancy idea of spinning a web, but she did, and it was clever of her too. And since then, all of the spiders have had to work the same trick. It's not a bad pitch on the whole. It's cruel," replied Wilbur, who did not intend to be argued out of his position.
Well, you can't talk, said Charlotte. You have your meals brought to you in a pail. Nobody feeds me. I have to get my own living. I live by my wits. I have to be sharp and clever, lest I go hungry. I have to think things up, catch what I can, take what comes, and it just so happens, my friends, that what comes is flies and insects and bugs. And furthermore, said Charlotte, shaking one of her legs, do you realize that if I didn't catch bugs and eat them, bugs would increase and multiply and get so numerous they destroy the earth, wipe out everything? Really? Said Warble. I wouldn't want that to happen. Perhaps your web is a good thing after all. The goose had been listening to their conversation and chuckling to herself. There are a lot of things Warble doesn't know about life, she thought. He's really a very innocent pig. He doesn't even know what's going to happen to him around Christmas time. He has no idea that Mr. Zuckerman and Laruvi are plotting to kill him. The goose raised herself a bit and poked her eggs a little further under her so that they would receive the full heat from her warm body and soft feathers. Charlotte stood quietly over the fly, preparing to eat it. Warble lay down and closed his eyes. He was tired from his wakeful night and from the excitement of meeting someone for the first time. A breeze brought him the smell of clover, the sweet-smelling world beyond his fence. Well, he thought, I've got a new friend, all right. But what a gamble friendship is. Charlotte is fierce, brutal, scheming, bloodthirsty, everything I don't like. How can I learn to like her, even though she's pretty and, of course, clever? Wilbur was merely suffering the doubts and fears that often go with finding a new friend. In good time, he was to discover that he was mistaken about Charlotte. Underneath her rather bored and cruel exterior, she had a kind heart, and she was quite loyal and true to the very end. Chapter 6. Summer Days. The early summer days on a farm are the happiest and fairest days of the year. Lilacs bloom and make the air sweet, and then fade. Apple blossoms come while the lilacs, and the bees visit around among the apple trees. The days grow warm and soft. School ends, the children have time to play and to fish for trouts in the brook. Ivy often brought a trout home in his pocket. Avery often brought a trout home in his pocket, warm and stiff and ready to be fried for supper. Now that school was over, Fern visited the barn almost every day to sit quietly on her store. The animals treated her as an equal. The sheep lay calmly at her feet. On the 1st of July, the work horses were hitched to the mowing machine, and Mr. Zuckerman climbed into the seat and drove into the field. All morning, you could hear the rattle of the machine as it went around and around, where the tall grass fell down behind the cutter bar in long green swaths. Next day, if there was no thunder shower, our hands would harp, rake, and pitch and load, and the hay would be hauled into the barn in the high hay wagon, with Fern and Avery fighting at the top of the load. Then the hay would be hoisted, sweet and warm, into the big loft, until the whole barn seemed like the wonderful bed of timothy and clover. It was fine to jump in and perfect to hide in, And sometimes Avery would find a little grass snake in the hay and would add it to the other things in his pocket. Early summer days are a jubilee time for birds. In the field, around the house, in the barn, in the woods, in the swamp, everywhere, love and songs and nests and eggs. From the edge of the wood, the white-throated sparrow, which must come all the way from Boston, cries, "Oh, Peabody, Peabody, Peabody," on an apple bough. The poppy teeters and wags its tail and says, "Peoby, Peoby." The song sparrow, who knows how brief and lovely life is, says, "Sweet, sweet, sweet interlude, sweet, sweet, sweet interlude." If you enter the barn, the swallows swoops down from their nests and squirt. "Cheeky, cheeky," they say. In early summer, there are plenty of things for a child to eat and drink, and suck and chew. Dandelion stems are full of milk. Clover heads are loamy with nectar. The frigidaire is full of ice-cold drinks. Everywhere you look is life. Even the little bar of spit on the wheat stack, if you poke it apart, has a green worm inside it. And on the underside of the leaf of a potato vine are the bright orange eggs of a potato bug. It was on a day in early summer that the goose's eggs hatched. This is an important event in the barn cellar. Fern was there, sitting at her door when it happened. Except for the goose herself, Charlotte was the first to know that the gosling had at last arrived. Goose knew a day in advance that they were coming. She could hear their weak voices calling from inside the egg. She knew that they were in desperately cramped position inside the shell and were most anxious to break through and get out. So she sat quite still and talked less than usual. When the first gosling poked its green head through the goose's feathers and looked around, Charlotte spied it and made the announcement. "I am sure," she said, "that every one of us here will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting efforts and patience on the part of our friend the goose, she now has something to show for it. The goslings have arrived. May I offer my sincere congratulations?" "Thank you, thank you, thank you," said the goose, nodding and bowing shamelessly. "Thank you," said the gander. "Congratulations," shouted Wilbur. "How many goslings are here? I can only see one." "There are 7," said the goose. "Fine," said Charlotte. "7 is our lucky number." "Lucky has nothing to do with this," said the goose. "It was good management and hard work." At this point, Temperton showed his nose from his hiding place under Wilbur's throw. He glanced at Fern and crept cautiously toward the goose, keeping look to the wall, close to the wall. Everyone watched him. He was not well liked, not trusted. "Look," he began in a sharp voice. "You say you have 7 goslings? There were 8 eggs. What happened to the other egg? Why didn't it hatch?" "It's a dud, I guess," said the goose. "What are you going to do with it?" continued Temperton, the little round beady eyes fixed on the goose. "You can have it," replied the goose, "roll it away and add it to the nasty collection of yours." Temperton had a habit of picking up unusual objects around the farm and storing them into the home. He saved everything. "Certainly, said the gander. "You may have the egg, but I'll tell you one thing, Temperton. If I ever catch you poking your ugly nose around our goslings, I'll give you the worst pounding a rat ever took." And the gander opened his strong wings and beat the air with them to show his power. He was strong and brave, but the truth is, The goose and the gander were worried about Temperton, and with good reason. The rat had no morals, no conscience, no scruples, no consideration, no decency, no mark of rodent kindness, no compunctions, no higher feeling, no friendliness, no anything. He would kill a gosling if he could get away with it. The goose knew that. Everybody knew that. With her broad bill, the goose pushed the unhatched egg out of the nest, and the entire company watched at the disgust with the rat, while the rat roared it away. Even Warble, who could eat almost everything, was appalled. Imagine wanting a junky old rotten egg, he muttered. A rat is a rat, said Charlotte. She laughed a tinkling little laugh. But, my friends, if that ancient egg ever breaks, this barn will be untenable. What's that mean? Said Wilbur. It means nobody will be able to live here on account of the smell. A rotten egg is a regular stink bomb. I won't break it, snarled Temperton. I know what I'm doing. I handle stuff like this all the time. He disappeared into the tunnel, pushing the goose egg in front of him. He pushed and nudged till he succeeded in rolling it into his lair under the throw. That afternoon, when the wind had died down and the barnyard was quiet and warm, the grey goose led her 7 goslings off the nest and out into the world. Mr. Zuckerman spied them when he came with Wilbur's supper. Well, hello there, he said, smiling all over. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 baby geese. Now, isn't that lovely? Chapter 7. Bad News. Wilbur liked Charlotte better and better each day. Her campaign against insects seemed sensible and useful. Hardly anybody around the farm had a good word to say for a fly. Flies spent their time pestering others. The cow hated them, the horses detested them, the sheep loathed them. Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman were always complaining about them and putting up screens. Wilbur admired the way Charlotte managed. He was particularly glad that she always put her victim to sleep before eating it. It's real thoughtful of you to do that, Charlotte, he said. Yes, she replied in a sweet musical voice. I always give them an anesthetic so they won't feel pain. It's a little service I've thrown in. As days went by, Wilbur grew angry. He ate 3 big meals a day. He spent long hours laying on his side, half asleep, dreaming pleasant dreams. He enjoyed good health, and he gained a lot of weight. One afternoon, and when Fern was sitting on her stool, the oldest sheep walked into the barn and stopped to pay a call on Wilbur. Hello, she said. Seems to me you're putting on weight. Yes, I guess I am, replied Wilbur. At my age, it's a good idea to keep gaining. Just the same, I don't envy you, said the gold sheep. You know why they're fattening you up, don't you? No, said Wilbur. Well, I don't like to spread bad news, said the sheep, but they're fattening you up because they're going to kill you, that's why. They're going to do what? Screamed Wilbur. Fern grew rigid on her store. Kill you, turn you into smoked bacon and ham, continued the old sheep. Almost all young pigs get murdered by the farmers as soon as the real cold weather sets in. There's a regular conspiracy around here to kill you at Christmas time. Everybody is in the plot. Lurvy, Zuckerman, even John Arrowbar. Mr. Arrowbar, sobbed Wilbur. Fern's father? Certainly. When a pig is to be butchered, everybody helps. I'm an old sheep and I see the same thing, same old business, year after year. Arrowbar arrives with his 22 shoots The Stop, screamed Wilbur. I don't want to die. Save me, somebody save me. Fern was just about to jump up when a voice whispered. Be quiet, Wilbur, said Charlotte, who had been listening to the awful conversation. I can't be quiet, screamed Wilbur, racing up and down. I don't want to be killed. I don't want to die. Is it true what the old sheep say, Charlotte? Is it true that they are going to kill me when the cold weather comes? Well, said the spider, plucking thoughtfully at her web. The old sheep has been around this barn a long time. She had seen many spring pigs come and go. If she says they plan to kill you, I'm sure it's true. It's also the dirtiest trick I ever heard of. What people don't think of. Wilbur burst into tears. I don't want to die, he moaned. I want to stay alive, right here in my comfortable manure pile with all my friends. I want to breathe in the beautiful air and lie in the beautiful sun. You're certainly making a beautiful noise, snapped the oldest sheep. I don't want to die, screamed Wilbur, throwing himself to the ground. You shall not die, said Charlotte briskly. What, really? Cried Wilbur. Who's going to save me? I am, said Charlotte. How? Asked Wilbur. That remains to be seen, but I am going to save you, and I want you to quiet down immediately. You are carrying on a childish way. Stop your crying. I can't stand hysterics. Chapter 8. A Talk at Home. On Sunday morning, Mr. and Mrs. Araba and Fern was sitting at breakfast in the kitchen. Avery had finished and was upstairs looking for his slingshot. Did you know that Uncle Homer's goslings have hatched? Asked Fern. How many? Asked Mr. Araba. 7, replied Fern. There were 8 eggs, but 1 egg didn't hatch, and the goose told Temperton she didn't want it anymore, so he took it away. The goose did what? Said Mrs. Araba, gazing at her daughter with a queer, worried look. Told Temperton she didn't want the egg anymore, repeated Fern. Who is Temperton? Asked Mrs. Araba. He's a rat, replied Fern. None of us like him much. Who's us? Asked Mr. Araba. Oh, everybody in the barn cellar. Wilbur and the sheep and the lambs and the goose and the gander and the goslings and Charlotte and me. Charlotte? Said Mrs. Araba. Who's Charlotte? She's Wilbur's best friend. She's terribly clever. What does she look like? Asked Mrs. Araba. Well, said Fern thoughtfully, she has 8 legs. Our spiders do, I guess. Charlotte is a spider? Asked Fern's mother. Fern nodded. A big gray one. She has a web across the top of Wilbur's doorway. She catches flies and sucks their blood. Wilbur adores her. Does he really? Said Mrs. Araba, rather vaguely. She was staring at Fern with a worried expression on her face. Oh, yes, Wilbur adores Charlotte, said Fern. Do you know what Charlotte said when the goslings hatched? I haven't the faintest idea, said Mr. Araba. Tell us. Well, when the first gosling stuck its little head out from under the goose, I was sitting on my stool in the corner, and Charlotte was on her web. She made a speech. She said, I'm sure that every one of us here in the barn cellar will be gratified to learn that after 4 weeks of unremitting effort and patience on the part of the goose, she now has something to show for it. Don't you think that is a pleasant thing for her to say? Yes, I do, said Mrs. Araba. And now, Fern, it's time to get ready for Sunday school. And tell Avery to get ready. And this afternoon you can't tell me more about what goes on in Uncle Homer's barn. Aren't you spending quite a lot of time there? You go there almost every afternoon, don't you? I like it there, replied Fern. She wiped her mouth and ran upstairs. After she had left the room, Mrs. Arabella spoke in a low voice to her husband. I worry about Fern, she said. Did you hear the way she rambled on about animals, pretending that they talked? Mr. Arabella chuckled. Maybe they do talk, he said. I'm sometimes wondered. At any rate, don't worry about Fern. She's just got a lively imagination. Kids think that they hear all sorts of things. Just the same, I do worry about her, replied Mrs. Arabella. I don't think I shall ask Dr. Dorian about her next time I see him. He loves Fern almost as much as we do, and I want him to know how queerly she is acting about the pig and everything. I don't think it's normal. You know perfectly well animals don't talk. Mrs. Arabella grinned. Maybe our ears aren't as sharp as Fern's, he said. Chapter 9. Wilbur's Boast. Spider's web is stronger than it looks. Although it is made of thin, delicate strands, the web is not easily broken. However, a web gets torn every day by the insects who kicks around in it. The spider must rebuild it when it gets full of holes. Charlotte liked to do her weaving during the late afternoon, and Fern liked to sit nearby and watch. One afternoon, she heard the most interesting conversation and witnessed a strange event. You have awfully hairy legs, Charlotte, said Wilbur, and the spider busily worked at her task. My legs are hairy for a good reason, replied Charlotte. Furthermore, each leg of mine has 7 sections. The coxa, the trochanter, the femur, the patella, the tibia, and the metatarsus. And the tarsus. Wilbur sat bolt upright. You are kidding, he said. No, I'm not either. Say those names again. I didn't catch them the first time. Coxa, trochanter, femur, patella, tibia, metatarsus, and tarsus. Goodness, said Wilbur, looking down at his own chubby legs. I don't think my legs have 7 sections. Joy, you and I lead different lives. You don't have a spindle web. Have to spin a web. That takes your leg work. I don't spin a web. I could spin a web if I tried, said Wilbur boasting. I've just never tried. Let's see you do it, said Charlotte. Fern chuckled softly, and her eyes grew wide with love for the pig. Okay, replied Wilbur. You coach me and I'll spin one. It must be a lot more fun to spin a web. A lot of fun to spin a web. How do I start? Take a deep breath, said Charlotte, smiling. Wilbur, take deeply. Now climb to the highest place you can get to, like this. Charlotte raced up to the top of the doorway. Wilbur scrambled to the top of the manure pile. Very good, said Charlotte. Now make an attachment with your spinnerets, hurl yourself into space, and let out the drag line as you go down. Wilbur hesitated for a moment, then jumped out into the air. He glanced hastily behind to see a piece of rope was following him to check his bars, but nothing seemed to be happening in the rear, and the next thing he knew, he landed with a thump. Oomph! He groaned. Charlotte laughed so hard her web began to sway. What did I do wrong? asked Pig when he recovered from his bump. Nothing, said Charlotte. It was a nice try. I think I'll try it again, said Wilbur cheerfully. I believe what I need is a little piece of string to hold me. The pig walked out to his yard. You there, Templeton? He called. The rat poked his head out from under the throw. Got a little piece of string I could borrow? Asked Rupert. I need to spin a web. Yes, indeed, replied Temperton, who saved his strings. No troubles at all. Anything to oblige. He crept down into his hole, pushed the goose egg out of the way, and returned with an old piece of dirty white string. Wilbur examined it. That's just the thing, he said. Tie one end to my tail, will you, Temperton? Wilbur crouched down with a thin curly tail towards the red. Temperton seized the string, passed it around the end of the pig's tail, and tried 2 half hitches. Charlotte watched in delight. Like Fern, she was truly fond of Wilbur, whose smelly pen and stale food attracted the flies that she needed. And she was proud to see that he was not quitter and was willing to try again to spin a web. While the rat and the spider and the little girl watched, Wilbur climb down to the top of the manure pile, full of energy and hope. Everybody watch, he cried, and summoning all his strength, he threw himself into the air headfirst. The string trailed behind him, but he had neglected to fasten to other end to anything. It didn't really do any good, and Wilbur landed with a thud, crashing and hurt. Tears came to his eyes. Temperton agreed. Charlotte just sat quietly. After a bit, she spoke. You can spin a web. You can spin a web, Wilbur. And I advise you to put the idea out of your mind. You lack 2 things needed for spinning a web. What are they? Asked Wilbur sadly. You lack a set of spinnerets, and you lack know-how. But sure up, you don't need a web. The government supplies you with 3 big meals a day. Why would you worry about traveling food? Wilbur sighed. You're ever so much cleverer and brighter than I am, Charlotte. I guess I just trying to show off. Serves me right. Temperton untied his string and took it back to his home. Charlotte returned to her weaving. You needn't feel too badly, Wilbur, she said. No many creatures can spin webs. Even men aren't as good as it as spiders, although they think they're pretty good, and they'll try anything. Did you ever hear of the Queensboro Bridge? Wilbur shook his head. Is it a web? Sort of, replied Charlotte. But do you know how long it took men to build it? 8 whole years. My goodness, I would have starved to death waiting that long. I can't make a web in a single evening. What do people catch in the Queensboro Bridge? Bugs? Asked Wilbur. No, said Charlotte. They don't catch anything. They just keep trotting back and forth across the bridge, thinking there is something better on the other side. If there's hanging head on the top of that thing, and wait quietly, maybe something good comes along. But no, with men in rush every minute, I'm glad I'm a sedentary spider. What does sedentary mean? Asked Wilbur. Means I sit still a good part of the time and don't go wandering all over creation. I know a good thing, and the wait thing when I see it. And my web is a good thing. I stay put and wait for what comes. Gives me a chance to think. Well, I'm sort of sedentary myself, I guess, said the pig. I have to hang around here whether I want to or not. You know where I'd really like to be this evening? Where? In the forest, looking for beech nuts and truffles and delectable roots, pushing leaves aside with my wonderful strong nose, searching and sniffing along the ground, smelling. You smell just the way you are, remarked the lamb, who had just walked in. I can't smell you from here. You're the smileiest creature in the place. Wilbur hung his head. His eyes grew wet with tears. Charlotte noticed his embarrassment and she spoke sharply to Dayeon. Let Wilbur alone, she said. He's a perfect right to smell, considering his surroundings. You're no bundle of sweet peas yourself. Furthermore, you are interrupting a very pleasant conversation. What were we talking about, Wilbur, when we were so rudely interrupted? Oh, I don't remember, said Wilbur. It doesn't make any difference. Let's not talk anymore for a while, Charlotte. I'm getting sleepy. You go ahead and finish fixing your web, and I'll just lie here and watch you. It's a lovely evening. Wilbur stretched out on his side. Twilight settled over Zuckerman's barn, and a feeling of peace. Fern knew it was almost supper time, but she couldn't bear to leave. Swallows passed on silent wings and in and out of the doorways, bringing food to their young ones. From across the road, a bird sang. Whippoorwill. Willoughby sat down under an apple tree and lit his pipe. An animal sniffed the familiar smell of strong tobacco. Wilbur heard the twirr of a tree toad and the occasional slamming of the kitchen door. Arlie's sound made him feel comfortable and happy, for he loved life and loved to be part of the world on a summer evening. But as he lay there through thought, he remembered what the old sheep had told him. The thought of death came to him and began to tremble with fear. Charlotte, he said softly. Yes, Wilbur? I don't want to die. Of course you won't, said Charlotte in a comforting voice. I just love it here in the barn, said Wilbur. I love everything about this place. Of course you do, said Charlotte. We all do. The goose appeared, followed by her 7 goslings. They thrust their little necks out and kept up a musical whistle, like a tiny troop of pipers. Wilbur listened to the sound with love in his heart. Charlotte, he said. Yes, said the spider. Were you serious when I promised you would keep me from killing you? I was never more serious in my life. I'm not going to let you die, Wilbur. How are you going to save me? Asked Wilbur, whose curiosity was very strong on the point. Well, said Charlotte vaguely, I don't really know, but I'm working a plan. That's wonderful, said Wilbur. How is the plan coming, Charlotte? Have you got any very far with it? Is it coming out pretty well? Wilbur was trembling again, but Charlotte was cool and collected. Oh, it's coming all right, she said lightly. The plan is still in its early stages and hasn't completely shaped up yet, but I'm working on it. When do you work on it? Begged Wilbur. When I'm hanging head down at the top of my web. That's when I do thinking, because then all the blood is in my head. I'd be only glad to help in any way I can. Oh, I'll work it out alone, said Charlotte. I can think better if I'm alone. All right, said Wilbur, but don't fail to let me know if there's anything I can do to help, no matter how slight. Well, replied Charlotte, you must try to build yourself up. I want you to get plenty of sleep. And stop worrying. Never worry. Chew your feed thoroughly and eat every bite of it. Except you must leave just enough for Templeton. Gain weight and stay well. That's the way you can help. Keep fit and don't lose your nerve. Do you think you understand? Yes, I understand, said Wilbur. Go along to bed then, said Charlotte. Sleep is important. Wilbur trotted over to the darkest corner of his pen and threw himself down. He closed his eyes. In another minute he spoke. "Charlotte," he said. "Yes, Wilbur? May I go out to my throw and eat and see if I left any of my supper? I think I left just a tiny bit of mashed potato." "Very well," said Charlotte, "but I want you in bed again without delay." Wilbur started to race out of his yard. "Slowly, slowly," said Charlotte. "Never hurry and never worry." Wilbur checked himself and crept slowly to his throw. He found a bit of potato, chewed it carefully, swallowed it, and walked back to bed. He closed his eyes and was silent for a while. "Charlotte," he said in a whisper. "Yes? May I get a drink of milk? I think there are a few drops of milk left in my throat." "No, the throat is dry, and I want you to go to sleep. No more talking. Close your eyes and go to sleep." Wilbur shut his eyes. Fern got up from her store and started for home, her mind full of everything she had seen and heard. "Good night, Charlotte," said Wilbur. "Good night, Wilbur." Then there was a pause. "Good night, Charlotte." "Good night, Wilbur." "Good night." "Good night." Chapter 10. An Explosion. Day after day, the spider waited, a head down, for an idea to come to her. Hour by hour she sat motionless, deep in thought, having promised Wilbur that she would save his life. She was determined to keep her promise. Charlotte was naturally patient. She knew from experience that if she waited long enough, a fly would come to her web, and she felt sure that if she thought long enough about Wilbur's problem, an idea would come to her mind. Finally, one morning toward the middle of July, the idea came. "Wow, how perfectly simple," she said to herself. "The way to save Wilbur's life is to play a trick on Zuckerman. If I can fool a bug," thought Charlotte, "I can surely fool a man. People are not as smart as bugs." Wilbur walked into the yard just at that moment. "What are you thinking about, Charlotte?" he said. "I was just thinking," said the spider, "that people are very gullible." "What does gullible mean?" "We're very gullible." "What does gullible mean?" "Gullible. What does gullible mean?" "Easy to fool," said Charlotte. "That's a mercy," replied Wilbur, and he lay down in the shade of his fence and went fast asleep. The spider, however, stayed wide awake, gazing affectionately at him and making plans for his future. Summer was half gone. She knew she didn't have much time. That morning, just as Wilbur fell asleep, Avery Arrowbar wandered into the Zuckerman's front yard, followed by Fern. Avery carried a live frog in his hand. Fern had a crown of daisies in her hair. The children ran for the kitchen just in time for a piece of blueberry pie, said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Look at my frog," said Avery, placing the frog on the drain board and hollowing out his hand for a pipe. "Take that thing out there," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "He's hot," said Fern. "He's almost dead, that frog." "He is not," said Avery. "He lets me scratch him between his eyes." The frog jumped and landed in Mrs. Zuckerman's dishpan full of soapy water. "You are getting your pie on you," said Fern. "Can I look for eggs in the hen house, Aunt Edith?" "Run outdoors, both of you, and don't bother the hens." It's going all over everything," shouted Fern. His pie is all over his front." "Come on, frog," cried Avery. He scooped up his frog. The frog kicked the splashing soapy water onto the blueberry pie. "Another crisis," groaned Fern. "Let's swing in the swing," said Avery. The children ran to the barn. Mr. Zuckerman had the best swing in the country. It was a single long piece of heavy rope tied to the beam of the north doorway. At the bottom end of the rope was a fat knot to sit on. It was arranged so that you could swing without being pushed. You climb a ladder to the hayloft. Then, holding the rope, you stood at the edge and looked at, and were scared and dizzy. Then you straddled the knot so that it acted as a seat. Then you got up all your nerve, took a deep breath, and jumped. For a second, you seemed to be falling to the barn floor far below, but then suddenly the rope would begin to catch you, and we would sail through the barn door, going a mile a minute. When the wind whistling in your eyes and ear and hair. Then you would zoom upward into the sky and look up at the clouds, and the rope would twist, and you would twist and turn with the rope. Then you would drop down, down, down out of the sky and come sailing back into the barn, almost into the hayloft, then sail out again. Not quite so far this time, then in again, not quite so high, then out again, then in again, then out, then in, and then you jump off and fall down and let somebody else try it. Mothers for miles around worried about Zuckerman's swing. They feared some children would fall off, but no children ever did. Children almost always hang on to things tighter than their parents think they will. Avery put the frog in his pocket and climbed to the hayloft. The last time I swung in this swing, I almost crashed into the barn swallow. He yelled. "Take that frog out," ordered Fern. Avery straddled the rope and jumped. He sailed out through the door, frog and all into the sky, and into the sky, frog and all. Then he sailed back into the barn. "Your tongue is purple," screamed Fern. "So is yours," cried Avery, sailing out again with the frog. "I have hay inside my dress. It itches," called Fern. "Scratch it," yelled Avery as he sailed back. "It's my turn," said Fern. "Jump off." "Fern's got an itch," sang Avery. When he jumped off, he threw the swing up to his sister. She shut her eyes tight and jumped. She felt this dizzy drop, then the supporting lift of the swing. When she opened her eyes, she was looking up into the blue sky and was about to fly back through the door. They took turns for an hour. When the children grew tired of swinging, they went down towards the pasture and picked wild raspberries and ate them. Their tongues turned purple to red. Fern bit a raspberry that had a bad-tasting bug inside it and got discouraged. Avery found an empty candy box and put his frog in it. The frog seemed tired after his morning in the swing. The children walked slowly up towards the barn. They too was tired and hardly had energy enough to walk. "Let's build a tree house," suggested Avery. "I want to live in a tree with my frog." "I'm going to visit Wilbur," Fern announced. Dayeon climbed the fence into the lane and walked lazily toward the pig pen. Wilbur heard them coming and got up. Avery noticed a spider web and coming closer, he saw Charlotte. "Hey, look at this big spider," he said. "It's tremendous." "Leave it alone," commanded Fern. "You've got a frog. Isn't that enough? That's a fine spider. I'm going to capture it," said Avery. He took the cover of the candy box, then he picked up a stick. "I'm going to knock that or spider into this box," he said. Herbert's heart almost stopped when he saw what was going on. This might be the end of Charlotte. The boy succeeded in catching her. "You stop it, Avery," cried Fern. Avery put one leg over the fence of the pig pen. He was just about to raise his stick to hit Charlotte when he lost his balance. He swayed and toppled and landed his loss on the edge of Wilbur's throw. The throw tipped up and then came down the slab. The goose egg was right underneath. There was a dull explosion as the egg broke, and there was a horrible smell. Fern screamed. Avery jumped to his feet. The air was filled with terrible gases and smell from the rotten egg. Templeton, who had been resting in his home, scuttled away into the barn. "Good night," screamed Davy. "Good night. What a stink! Let's get out of here." Fern was crying. She heard her nose and ran towards the house. Avery ran after her, holding his nose. Charlotte felt greatly relieved to see him go. It had been a narrow escape. Rather, on that morning, the animals came up front from the pasture. The sheep, the lambs, the gander, the goose, and the 7 goslings. There were many complaints about the awful smell, and Wilbur had told a story over and over again how the Arab boy had tried to capture Charlotte, and how the smell of the broken egg drove him away just in time. It was that rotten goose egg that saved Charlotte's life, said Wilbur. The goose was proud of her share in the adventure. "I'm delighted that the egg never hatched," she gabbled. Temperton, of course, was miserable over the loss of his beloved egg, but he couldn't resist boasting. "It pays to save things," he said in a silly voice. "A rat never knows when something is going to come in handy. I never throw anything away." "Well," said one of the lambs, "this whole business is all well and good for Charlotte, but what about the rest of us? The smell is unbearable. Who wants to live in a barn with a perfume with rotten egg?" "Don't worry, you'll get used to it," said Temperton. He sat and pulled briskly at his long whiskers, then stepped away to pay a visit to the dump. When Lurvy showed up at lunchtime carrying a pail of food for Wilbur, he stopped short in a few paces from the pig pen. He sniffed the air and made a face. "What a thunder!" he said, setting the pail down. He picked up the stick that Avery had dropped down and pried the throw up. "Rats," he said. "Phew, I might have known a rat make a nest under this throw. How I hate a rat." And Lurvy dragged Wilbur's throw across the yard and kicked some dirt into the rat's nest, burying the broken egg and all Temperton's other possessions. Then he picked up the pail. Wilbur stood in the throw, drooling with hunger. Lurvy poured. The slops ran firmly down around the pig's eyes and ears. Wilbur grunted. He gulped and sucked. He sucked and gulped, making whooshing and swishing and swooshing noises, anxious to get everything at once. It was a delicious meal. Skim milk, wheat middlings, leftover pancakes, half a donut, the rind of the summer squash, 2 pieces of stale toast, a third of the ginger snap, a fish hair, 1 orange peel, several noodles from a noodle soup, and scum of a cup of cocoa, an ancient jelly roll, a strip of paper from the lining of the garbage pail, and a spoonful of raspberry jello. Wilbur ate heartily. He planned to leave half a noodle and a few drops of milk for Temperton. Then he remembered that the rat had been useful in saving Charlotte's life, and that Charlotte was trying to save his life. So he left a whole noodle instead of a half. Now that the broken egg was buried, the ale cleared, and the barn smelled good again. The afternoon passed, the evening came, shadows lengthened, the cool and kindly breaths of evening entered the doors and windows astride her web. Charlotte sat moodily eating a horsefly and thinking about the future. After a while, she bestirred herself. She descended to the center of the web, and there she began to cut some of her lines. She worked slowly but subtly, while the other creature drowsed. None of the others, even the goose, noticed that she was at work. Deep in his soft bed, Wilbur snoozed. Over in their favorite corner, the goslings whistled a night song. Charlotte quit a section out of her web, leaving an open space in the middle. Then she started weaving something to take the place of the threads she had removed. When Temperton got back to the dump around midnight, the spider was still at work. Chapter 16. Dr. Dorian. The next day was Saturday. Fern stood at the kitchen sink drying the breakfast dishes as her mother washed them. Mrs. Arabella worked silently. She hoped Fern would go out and play with other children instead of heading for the Zuckerman's barn to sit and watch animals. Charlotte is the best storyteller I ever heard, she said, poking her dish towel into a cereal bowl. Fern, said her mother most sternly, you must not invent things. You know spiders don't tell stories. Spiders can't talk. Charlotte can, replied Fern. She doesn't talk very loud, but she talks. What kind of story did she tell? Asked Mrs. Arabella. Well, began Fern. She told us about a cousin of hers who caught a fish in her web. Don't you think that's fascinating? Fern, dear, how would a fish get in a spider's web? Said Mrs. Arabella. You know it couldn't happen. You're making this up. Oh, it happened all right, replied Fern. Charlotte never fibs. The cousin of her built a web across the stream. One day she was hanging around on the web, and a tiny fish leaped into the air and got tangled in the web. The fish was caught by one fin. Mother, its tail was wildly thrashing and shining in the sun. Can't you just see a web sagging dangerously under the weight of the fish? Charlotte's cousin kept slipping and dodging out, and she was beaten mercilessly over the head of the wildly thrashing fish, dancing in, dancing out, throwing. Fern, snapped her mother, stop it, stop inventing these wild tales. I'm not inventing, said Fern. I'm just telling you the facts. What finally happened? Asked her mother, whose curiosity had begun to get the better of her. Charlotte's cousin won. She wrapped the fish up, then she ate him when she got good and ready. Spiders have to eat, the same as the rest of us. Yes, I suppose they do, said Mrs. Arabella vaguely. Charlotte has another cousin who is a balloonist. She stands on her head, lets out a lot of line, and carries it aloft on the wind. Mother, won't you simply love to do that? Yes, I would. Come along. Come to think of it, asked Mrs. Arabella. But Fern, darling, I wish you would play outdoors today instead of going to Uncle Homer's barn. Find some of your playmates and do something nice outdoors. You're spending too much time in that barn. It isn't good for you to be alone so much. Alone? My best friends are at the barn cellar. It is a very sociable place. Not at all lonely. Fern disappeared after a while, walking down the road toward Zuckerman's. Her mother dusted the sitting room. As she worked and kept thinking about Fern, it didn't seem natural for a little girl to be so interested in animals. Finally, Mrs. Arabella made up her mind. She would pay a call on old Dr. Dayeon and ask his advice. She got in the car and drove to his office in the village. Dr. Dayeon had a thick beard. He was glad to see Mrs. Arabella and gave her a comfortable chair. It's about Fern, she explained. Fern spends entirely too much time in the Zuckerman's barn. Doesn't seem normal. She sits on a milk store in the corner of the barn cellar near the pig pen and watches animals hour after hour. She just sits and listens. Dr. Dayeon leaned back and closed his eyes. How enchanting, he said. It must be real nice and quiet down there. Homer has some sheep, hasn't he? Yes, said Mrs. Arabella. But it all started with that pig we left Fern to raise with a bottle. She calls him Wilbur. Homer bought the pig, and ever since it left our place, Fern had been going to her uncle's to be near it. I've been hearing things about that pig, said Dr. Dorian, opening his eyes. They say he is quite a pig. Have you heard about the words that appeared in the spider web? Asked Mrs. Rubber nervously. Yes, replied the doctor. Well, do you understand it? Asked Mrs. Rubber. Understand what? So you understand how there can be any writing in a spider's web. Oh no, said Dr. Dorian. I don't understand it. But for that matter, I don't understand how a spider learned to spin a web in the first place. When the words appeared, everyone said they were a miracle, but nobody pointed out that a web itself is a miracle. What is miraculous about a spider web? Said Mrs. Rubber. I don't see why you say a web is a miracle. It's just a web. Ever tried to spin one? Asked Dr. Dorian. Mr. Rubber shifted uneasily in her chair. No, she replied, but I can crochet a doily, and I can knit a sock. Sure, said the doctor, but somebody taught you, didn't they? My mother taught me. Well, who taught a spider? A young spider knows how to spin a web without any instructions from anybody. Don't you regard that as a miracle? I suppose so, said Mrs. Rubber. I never looked at it that way before. Still, I won't understand how those words got into the web. I don't understand it, and I don't like what I can't understand. None of us do, said Dr. Dorian, sighing. I'm a doctor. Doctors are supposed to understand everything. But I don't understand everything, and I don't intend to let it worry me. Mrs. Rubber fidgeted. Fern says the animals talk to each other. Dr. Dorian, do you believe animals talk? I never heard one say anything, he replied, but that proves nothing. It is a quite possible thing that an animal has spoken civilly to me and that I didn't catch the remark because I was paying attention. I wasn't paying attention. Children pay better attention than grown-ups. If a Fern says that the animals in Zuckerman's barns talk, I'm quite ready to believe her. Perhaps if people talked less, animals would talk more. People are incessant talkers. I can give you my word on that. Well, I don't feel better about Fern, said Mrs. Rubber. You don't think I need worry about her? Does she look well? Asked the doctor. Oh, yes. Appetite good? Oh, yes. She's always hungry. Sleep well at night? Oh, yes. Then don't worry, said the doctor. Do you think she'll ever start thinking about something besides pigs and sheep and geese and spiders? How old is Fern? She is 8. Well, said Dr. Dorian. I think she will always love animals, but I doubt that she spends her entire life in Homer Zuckerman's barn cellar. How about boys? Does she know any boys? She knows Henry Fussy, said Mrs. Rubber brightly. Dr. Dorian closed his eyes again and went in a deep thought. Henry Fussy, he remembered. Remarkable. Well, I don't think you have anything to worry about. Let Fern associate with her friends in the barn if she wants to. I would say offhand. But spiders and pigs are really as interesting as Henry Fussy. Yet I predict that the day will come when even Henry will drop some chance remark that catches Fern's attention. It's amazing how children change from year to year. How's Avery? He asked, opening his eyes wide. Oh, Avery, chuckled Mrs. Rubber. Avery is always fine, of course. She gets into position, poison ivy, and gets stung by wasps and bees, and brings frogs and snakes home, and breaks everything he lays his hand on. He's fine. Good, said the doctor. Mrs. Arabella said goodbye and thanked Dr. Dayeon very much for his advice. She felt greatly relieved. Chapter 5. The Crickets. The crickets sang in the grasses. They sang the song of summer's ending, a sad, monotonous song. Summer is over and gone, they sang, over and gone, over and gone. Summer is dying, dying. The crickets felt it was their duty to warn everybody that summertime cannot last forever, even on the most beautiful days in the whole year. The days when summer is changing in the fall, the crickets spread the rumor of sadness and change. Everybody heard the song of the crickets. Avery and Fern Arabella heard it as they walked the dusty road. They knew that school would soon begin again. The young geese heard it and knew that they would never be little goslings again. Charlotte heard it and knew that she hadn't much time left. Mrs. Zuckerman, at work in the kitchen, heard the crickets, and sadness came over her too. Another summer gone, she sighed. Little V, at work building a crate for Wilbur, heard the song and knew it was time to dig potatoes. Summer is over and gone, repeated the crickets. How many nights are frost, sang the crickets. Goodbye, summer, goodbye, goodbye. The sheep heard the crickets and felt so uneasy they broke a hole in the pasture fence and wandered up into the fields across the road. The gander discovered the hole and let his family through, and they walked to the orchard and ate the apples that were lying on the ground. A little maple tree in the swamp heard the cricket's song and turned bright red with anxiety. Wilbur was now the center of attraction on the farm. Good food and regular hours were showing results. Wilbur was a pig any man would be proud of. One day more than 100 people came to stand at his yard and admire him. Charlotte had written the word radiant, and Wilbur really looked radiant as he stood in the golden sunlight. Ever since the spider had befriended him, he had done his best to live up to his reputation. When Charlotte's Web said some pig, Wilbur had tried hard to look like some pig. When Charlotte's Web said terrific, Wilbur had tried to look terrific, and now that the web said radiant, he did everything possible to make himself glow. It is not easy to look radiant, but Wilbur threw himself into it with a whirl. He would turn his head slightly and blink his long eyelashes. Then he would breathe deeply, and when his audience grew bored, he would spring into the air and do a backflip with a half twist. At this, the crowd would yell and cheer. How's that for a pig? Mr. Zuckerman would ask. Well pleased with himself, that pig is radiant. Some of Wilbur's friends in the barn worried for fear his attention would go to his head and make him stuck up, but he never did. Wilbur was modest. Fame did not spoil him. He still worried some about the future, as he could hardly believe that a mere spider would be able to save his life. Sometimes at night he were coming to get him with knives and guns, but that was only a dream. In daytime, Wilbur usually felt happy and confident. No pig ever had truer friends, and he realized that friendship is one of the most satisfying things in the world. Even the song of the crickets did not make Wilbur too sad. He knew it was almost time for the country fair, and he was looking forward to the trip. If he could distinguish himself at a fair and maybe win some prize money, he was sure Zuckerman would let him live. Charlotte had worries of her own, but she kept quiet about him. One morning, Wilbur asked her about the fair. "You're going with me, aren't you, Charlotte?" he said. "Well, I don't know," replied Charlotte. "The fair comes at a bad time for me. I shall find it inconvenient to leave home, even for a few days." "Why?" asked Wilbur. I just don't feel like leaving my web. Too much going on around here." "Please come with me," begged Wilbur. "I need you, Charlotte. I can't stand going to the fair without you. You just got to come." "No," said Charlotte. "I believe I'd better stay home and see if I can't get some work done." "I can't get some work done." "What kind of work?" asked Wilbur. "Egg laying. It's time. I made an egg sack and filled it with eggs." "I don't know you could lay eggs," said Wilbur in amazement. "Oh, sure," said the spider. "I'm versatile." "Versatile? What does versatile mean? Full of eggs?" said Wilbur. "Certainly not," said Charlotte. "Versatile means I can turn with ease from one thing to another. It means I don't have to limit my activities to spinning and trapping and stunts like that." "Why don't you come with me to the fairgrounds and lay your eggs there?" pleaded Wilbur. "It would be wonderful fun." Charlotte gave her web a twitch and modestly watched it sway. "I'm afraid not," she said. "I won't know the first thing about egg laying, Wilbur. I can't arrange my family duties to suit the management of a country fair. When I got ready to lay eggs, I have to lay eggs, fair or no fair. However, I don't want you to worry about it. You might lose weight. We'll leave it this way. I'll come to the fair if I possibly can." "Oh, good," said Wilbur. "I knew you wouldn't forsake me just when I needed you the most." All that day, Wilbur stayed inside, taking life easy in the straw. Charlotte rested and ate a grasshopper. She knew that she couldn't help Wilbur much longer. In a few days, she would have to drop everything and build a beautiful little sack that would hold her eggs. Chapter 6. Off to the Fair. The night before the country fair, everybody went to bed early. Fern and Avery were in their bed by 8. Avery lay dreaming about the Ferris wheel had stopped and that he was in the top car. Fern lay dreaming about that she was getting sick in the swings. Olivia was in bed by 8:30. He lay dreaming that he was throwing baseballs at a cloth cat and winning a genius Navajo blankets. Genuine Navajo blankets. Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman were in bed by 9. Mrs. Zuckerman lay and dreaming about a deep freeze unit. Mr. Zuckerman lay dreaming about Wilbur. He dreamt that Wilbur had grown until he was 116 feet long and 92 feet high, and that he had won all the prizes at the fair and was covered with blue ribbons and even had a blue ribbon tied to the end of his tail. Down in his barn cellar, the animals too went to sleep early, all except Charlotte. Tomorrow would be the fair day. Every creature planned to get up early to see Wilbur off on his great adventure. When morning came, everybody got up at daylight. The day was hot. Up the road at the Everbird's house, Fern lugged a pail of hot water to her room and took a sponge bath. Then she put up her prettiest dress because she knew she would see boys at the fair. Mrs. Everbird scrubbed the back of Avery's neck and wet his hair and parted it and brushed it down hard till it stood straight up. Avery put up clean underwear, clean blue jeans, and a clean shirt. Mr. Everbird dressed. He breakfasted and then went out and polished his truck. He had offered to drive everybody to the fair, including Wilbur. Bright and early, Lurvy put clean straw in Wilbur's crate and lifted it into the pig pen. The crate was green, and in gold letters it said, Zuckerman's famous pig. Charlotte had her web, looking fine for the occasion. Wilbur ate the breakfast slowly. He tried to look radiant without getting food in his ears. In the kitchen, Mrs. Zuckerman suddenly made an announcement. Homer, she said to her husband, I am going to give a pig a buttermilk bath. A what? Said Mr. Zuckerman. A buttermilk bath. My grandmother used to bathe her pig with buttermilk when it got dirty. I just remembered. Wilbur's not dirty, said Mr. Zuckerman proudly. He's fluffy behind the ears, said Mrs. Zuckerman. Every time Wilbur slops him, the food runs down around his ears. Then it dries and forms crust. He also has a smudge on one side where he lays in the manure. He lays in clean straw, corrected Mr. Zuckerman. Well, he's dirty and he's got to have a bath. Mr. Zuckerman sat down weakly and ate a donut. His wife went to the woodshed. When she returned, she wore rubber boots and an old raincoat, and she carried a bucket of buttermilk and a small wooden paddle. Edith, you are crazy, mumbled Zuckerman, but she paid no attention to him. Together they walked to the pig pen. Mrs. Zuckerman wasted no time. She climbed in with Wilbur and went to work. Dipping her paddle into the buttermilk, she rubbed him all over. The geese gathered around to see the fun, and so did the sheep and lambs. Even Temperton poked his head out cautiously to watch Wilbur get a buttermilk bath. Charlotte got so interested she lowered herself on the drag line so she could see better. Wilbur stood still and closed his eyes. He could feel the buttermilk trickling down his sides. He opened his mouth and some buttermilk ran in. It was delicious. He felt radiant and happy. When Mrs. Zuckerman got through and rubbed him dry, he was the cleanest, prettiest pig you ever saw. He was pure white pink around the ears and snout, and smooth as silk. The Zuckermans went up to change into their best clothes. Lurvy went to shave and put up his plaid shirt and his purple necktie. The animals were left to themselves in the barn. The 7 goslings paraded down there and around their mother. Please, please, please take us to the fair, begged the goslings. Then all 7 began teasing to go. Please, 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 please. They made quite a racket. Children, snapped the goose. You're sitting quietly, idly at home. Only Wilbur is going down to the fair. Just then Charlotte interrupted. I shall go too, she said softly. I have decided to go with Wilbur. He may need me. We can't tell what may happen at the fairgrounds. Somebody get to go along. Who knows how to write? And I think Temperton better come too. I might need somebody to run errands and do general works. I'm staying right here, grumbled the rat. I haven't the slightest interest in fairs. That's because you've never been to one, remarked the old sheep. A fair is a rat's paradise. Everyone spills food at a fair. A rat can creep out late at night and have a feast. In the horse barn you will find oats and the trotters' pacers they have sparred. In the trampled grass of the infield, you will find old discarded lunch boxes containing a foul remains of peanut butter sandwiches, hard-boiled cracker crumbs, bits of donuts, and particles of cheese, and the hard-packed dirt of the midway. After the glaring lights are out and the people have gone home and to bed, you will find the veritable treasures of popcorn fragments, frozen custard dribblings, canned apples abandoned by tired children, sugar fluff crystals, salted almonds, popsicles, partially gnawed ice cream cones, and wooden sticks of lollipops. Everywhere it's loot for a rat. In tents, in booths, in hay lofts. Why, a fair has enough disgusting leftover food to satisfy a whole army of rats. Temperton's eyes were blazing. Is this true? He asked. Is this appetizing yarn of yours true? I like a high living, and what you say tempts me. It is true, said Old Sheep. Go to the fair, Temperton. You'll find that the conditions at the fair will surpass your wildest dreams. Buckets with sour mash sticking to them, tin cans containing particles of tuna fish, greasy paper bags stuffed with rotten. That's enough, cried Temperton. Don't tell me any more. I'm going. Good, said Charlotte, winking at the oldest sheep.
Now then, there is no time to be lost. Wilbur will soon be put up into the crate. Temperton and I must get into the crate right now and hide ourselves. The rat didn't waste a minute. He scampered over to the crate, squatted between the slats, and put straws up over him so he was hidden from sight. All right, said Charlotte. I'm next. She sailed into the air, let out the drag line, and dropped gently to the ground. Then she climbed the side of the crate and hid herself into the knothole in the top board. The sheep nodded. What a cargo, she said. That sign ought to say Zuckerman's famous pig and 2 stowaways. Look out, the people are coming, umming, shouted the gander. Cheese it. The big truck with Mr. Arrowbar and the wheel backed slowly down towards the barnyard. Ruby and Mr. Zuckerman walked alongside. Fern and Avery were standing in the body of the trunk, hanging on the sideboards. Listen to me, whispered Old Sheep to Wilbur. When they open the crate and try to put you in, struggle. Don't go without a tussle. Pigs always resist when they are being loaded. If I struggle, I will get dirty, said Wilbur. Never mind, Dad. Do as I say. Struggle. If you were to walk into the crate without resisting, Zuckerman might think you were bewitched. He'd be scared to go to the fair. Temperton poked his head up through the straw. Struggle if you must, said he. But Kimberly, remember that I'm hiding down here in this crate, and I don't want to be stepped on, or kicked in the face, or pummeled, or crushed in any way, or squashed, or buffeted about, or bruised, or lacerated, or scared, or biffed. Just watch what you are doing, Mr. Radiant, when they get shoving you in. Be quiet, Temperton, said the sheep. Put in your head. They're coming. Look, Radiant Rubber. Lay low. Lay low. Charlotte, tuck it up. Geese. The truck backed slowly into the pig pen and stopped. Mr. Arrowman cut the motor, got out, walked around the rear, and lowered the tailgate. The geese cheered. Mr. Arrowman got out of the truck. Fern and Avery jumped to the ground. Mrs. Zuckerman came walking down from the house. Everybody lined up at the fence, and stood for a moment admiring Wilbur and the beautiful green crate. Nobody realized that the crate already contained a rat and a spider. That's some pig, said Mrs. Arrowbar. He's terrific, said Ruby. He's very radiant, said Fern, remembering the day he was born. Well, said Mrs. Zuckerman, he's clean anyway. The burr mark certainly helped. Mr. Arrowbar studied Wilbur carefully. Yes, he's a wonderful pig, he said. It's hard to believe that he was the runt of the litter. You'll get some extra good ham and bacon, Homer, when it comes time to kill that pig. Wilbur heard these words, and his heart almost stopped. I think I'm going to faint, he whispered to the old sheep who was watching. Kneel down, whispered the old sheep. Let the blood rush to your head. Wilbur sank sank to his knees, all radiance gone, his eyes closed. "Look!" screamed Fern. "He's fading away. Hey, watch me!" yelled Avery, crawling on all fours into the crate. "I'm a pig! I'm a pig!" Avery's foot touched Tumperton under the straw. "What a mess," thought the rat. "What fantastic creatures boys are. Why did I let myself in for this?" The geese saw Avery in the crate and cheered. "Avery, you get out of the crate this instant," commanded his mother. "What do you think you are?" "I'm a pig," cried Avery, tossing handfuls of straw into the air. "Oink, oink, oink. The truck is rolling away, Papa," said from the truck, with no one at the wheel. It started to run downhill. Mr. Arabir dashed into the driver's seat and pulled on the emergency brake. The truck stopped. The geese cheered. Charlotte crouched and made herself as small as possible in the knothole so Avery wouldn't see her. "Come out at once!" cried Mrs. Arabir. Avery crawled out of the crate on hands and knees, making faces at Wilbur. Wilbur fainted away. "The pig has passed out," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Throw water on him. Throw buttermilk," suggested Avery. The geese cheered. Lurvy ran for the pail of water. Fern climbed into the pen and knelt by Wilbur's side. "It's sunstroke," said Zuckerman. "The heat is too much for him. Maybe he's dead," said Avery. "Come out of that pig pen immediately," cried Mrs. Arabir. Avery obeyed his mother and climbed into the back of the truck so he could see better. Lurvy returned with cold water and dashed it on Wilbur. "Throw some on me," cried Avery. "I'm hot too." "Oh, keep quiet," hollered Fern. "Keep quiet." Her eyes were brimming with tears. Wilbur, feeling the cold water, came to. He was slowly to his feet while the geese cheered. "He's up," said Mr. Arabir. I guess there's nothing wrong with him." "I'm hungry," said Avery. "I want a candied apple." "Wilbur is all right now," said Fern. "We can start. I want to take a ride in the Ferris wheel." Mr. Zuckerman said Mr. Arabir and Lurvy grabbed the pig and pushed him headfirst towards the crate. Wilbur began to struggle. The harder the man pushed, the harder he held back. Avery jumped down and joined cheerfully, pressing his knee against Wilbur's behind. "All together now, boys, shove!" With a final heave, they jammed him into the crate. The geese cheered. Lurvy nailed some boards across the end so Wilbur couldn't back out. Then, using all their strength, the men picked up the crate and heaved it aboard the truck. They did not know that under the straw was a rat, and inside the knothole was a big gray spider. They saw only a pig. "Everybody in!" called Mr. Arabir. He started the motor. The ladies climbed in beside him. Mr. Zuckerman and Lurvy and Fern and Avery rode in back, hanging onto the sideboards. The truck began to move ahead. The geese cheered. The children answered their cheer, and away went everybody to the fair. Chapter 17. Encore. When they pulled up into the fairgrounds, they could hear music and see the Ferris wheel turning in the sky. They could smell the dust of the race truck where the sprinkling cart had moistened it. And they could smell hamburgers flying and see balloons afloat. They could hear sheep bleating in their pens. An enormous voice over the loudspeaker said, "Attention, please. We're the owner of the Pontiac car, license number H-2439. Please move your car away from the fireworks shed." "Can I have some money?" asked Fern. "Can I too?" asked Avery. "I'm going to win $1 by spinning a wheel, and it will stop at the right number," said Fern. "I'm going to steer a jet plane and make it bump into another one." "Can I have a balloon?" asked Fern. "Can I have a frozen custard and cheeseburger and some raspberry soda pop?" asked Avery. "You children be quiet till we get the pig unloaded," said Mrs. Arrowbar. Let the children go off by themselves, suggested Mr. Arrowbar. The fair only comes once a year. Mr. Arrowbar gave Fern 2 quarters and 2 dimes. He gave every 5 dimes and 4 nickels. Now run along, he said, and remember, the money has to last all day. Don't spend it all the first few minutes. And be back here at the trunk at noontime so you can all have lunch together. And don't eat a lot of stuffs that's going to make you sick to your stomach. And if you go in those swings, said Mrs. Arrowbar, you hang on tight. You hang on very tight, hear me? And don't get lost, said Mrs. Zuckerman, and don't get dirty. Don't get overheated, said their mother. Watch out for pickpockets, cautioned their father. And don't cross the racetrack when the horses are coming, cried Mrs. Zuckerman. The children grabbed each other by the hand and danced off in the direction of the merry-go-round, towards the wonderful music and the wonderful adventure and the wonderful excitement, into the wonderful midway where there would be no parents to guard them and guide them, and where they could be happy and free and do as they pleased. Mrs. Arrowbar stood quietly and watched them go. Then she sighed. Then she blew her nose. Do you really think it's all right? She asked. Well, they've got to grow up sometime, said Mr. Arrowbar, and a fair is a good place to start, I guess. While Wilbur was being unloaded and taken out of his crate and into his new pig pen, crowds gathered to watch. They stared at the sign, Zuckerman's famous pig. Wilbur stared back and tried to look extra good. He was pleased with his new home. The pen was grassy and it was shaded from the sun by a shed roof. Charlotte, watching her chance, scrambled out of the crate and climbed a post to the underside of the roof. Nobody noticed her. Temperton, not wishing to come out into broad daylight, stayed quietly under the straw at the bottom of the crate. Mr. Zuckerman poured some skim milk into Wilbur's throw, pitched clean straw into his pen, and then he and Mrs. Zuckerman and the Arrowbars walked away towards the cattle barn to look at purebred cows and to see the sights. Mr. Zuckerman particularly wanted to look at tractors. Mrs. Zuckerman wanted to see a deep freeze. Rosie wandered off by himself, hoping to meet friends and have some fun on the midway. As soon as the people were gone, Charlotte spoke to Wilbur. It's a good thing you can't see what I see, she said. What do you see? Asked Wilbur. There's a pig in the next pen, and he's enormous. I'm afraid he's much bigger than you are. Maybe he's older than I am, and has had more time to grow, suggested Wilbur. Tears began to come to his eyes. I'll drop down and have a closer look, Charlotte said. Then she crawled along a beam till she was directly over the next pen. She let herself down on the drag line until she hung in the air just in front of the big pig's snout. May I have your name? She said politely. The pig stared at her. No name, he said in a big, hearty voice. Just call me Uncle. There you are, Uncle, replied Charlotte. What is the date of your birth? Are you a spring pig? Sure, I'm a spring pig, replied Uncle. What do you think I was? A spring chicken? Ha ha, that's a good one, eh, sister? Mildly funny, said Charlotte. I've heard of funnier ones, though. Glad to meet you, and now I must be going. She ascended slowly and returned to Wilbur's pen. He claims he's a spring pig. And perhaps he is. One thing is certain. He has the most attractive personality. He is too familiar, too noisy, and he cracks weak jokes. Also, he is not anywhere near as clean as you are, nor as pleasant. I took quite a dislike to him in our brief interview. He's going to be a hard pick to beat, though, Robert, on account of his size and weight. But with the having of you, it can be done. When are you going to spin a web? Asked Robert. This afternoon, late, if I'm not tired, said Charlotte. The least thing tires me these days. I don't seem to have the energy I once had. My age, I guess. Robert looked at his friend. She looked rather swollen, and she seemed listless. I'm awfully sorry to hear that you're feeling poorly, Charlotte, he said. Perhaps if you spin a web and catch a couple of flies, you'll be better. Perhaps, she said wearily, but I feel like the end of a long day clinging upside down the ceiling. She settled down for a nap, leaving Wilbur very much worried. All morning, people wandered past Wilbur's pen. Dozens and dozens of strangers stopped to stare at him and to admire his silky white coat, his curly hair, his kind and radiant expression. Then they would move on to the next pen where the bigger pig lay. Wilbur heard several favorable remarks about Uncle's great size. He couldn't help overhearing these remarks, and he couldn't help worrying. And now, with Charlotte not feeling well, he thought, oh dear. All morning, Temperton slept quietly under the straw. The day grew fiercely hot. At noon, the Zuckermans and the Arrowbars returned to the pig pen. A few minutes later, Fern and Avery showed up. Fern had a monkey doll in her arms and was eating Cracker Jack. Avery had a balloon tied to his ear and was chewing a candy wrapper. The children were hot and dirty. Isn't it hot? Said Mrs. Zuckerman. It's terribly hot, said Mrs. Arrowbar, fanning herself with an advertisement of a deep freeze. One by one, they climbed into the truck and opened lunch boxes. The sun beat down on everything. Nobody seemed hungry. When are the judges going to decide about Wilbur? Asked Mr. Zuckerman. Not till tomorrow, said Mr. Zuckerman. Lurvy appeared, carrying an Indian blanket that he had won. That's just what we need, said Avery, a blanket. Of course it is, replied Lurvy, and he spread the blanket across the sideboards of the truck so that it was like a little tent. The children sat in the shade under the blanket and felt better. After lunch, they stretched out and fell asleep. Chapter 18. The Cool of the Evening. In the cool of the evening, when shadows darkened the fairgrounds, Temperton crept from the crate and looked around. Wilbur lay asleep in the straw. Charlotte was building a web. Temperton's keen nose detected many fine smells in the air. The rat was hungry and thirsty. He decided to go exploring. Without saying anything to nobody, he started off. Bring me back a word, Charlotte called after him. I shall be writing tonight for the last time. The rat mumbled something to himself and disappeared into the shadows. He did not like being treated like a messenger boy. After the heat of the day, the evening came as a welcome relief to all. The favorite sphere was lightened now. It went around and round in the sky and seemed twice as high as by day. There were lights in the midway. You could hear the crackle of the gambling machines and the music of the merry-go-round and the voice of the men in the piano booth calling numbers. The children felt refreshed after the nap. Fern met her friend Henry Fussy, and he invited her to ride with him in the Ferris wheel. He even bought a ticket for her, so it didn't cost her anything. When Mrs. Wilbur happened to look up into the starry sky and saw her little daughter sitting with Henry Fussy and going higher and higher in the air, and saw how happy Fern was, she just shook her head. My, she said, Henry Fussy, think of that. Temperton kept out of sight. In the tall grass behind the cattle barn, he found folded newspaper. Inside it were leftovers from somebody's lunch. A devoured ham sandwich, a piece of Swiss cheese, part of a hard-boiled egg, and a piece of Swiss cheese, part of a boiled egg, and a quarter of a roomy apple. The rat crawled in and ate everything. Then he tore a word out of the paper, rolled it up, and started back to Wilbur's pen. Charlotte had her web almost finished when Temperton returned. Came the newspaper clipping. She had left a space in the middle of the web. At this hour, no people were around Pigpen, so the rat and the spider and the pig were by themselves. I hope you brought a good one, Charlotte said. It's the last word I shall ever write. Here, said Temperton, unrolling the paper. What does it say? Said Charlotte. You'll have to read it for me. It says Humber, replied the rat. Humber, said Charlotte. Humber has two glands. That's Wilbur has two meanings. It means not proud, and it means near the ground. That's Wilbur all over. He's not proud and he's near the ground. Well, I hope you're satisfied, sneered the rat. I'm not going to spend all my time fetching and killing. I came to this fair to enjoy myself, not to deliver papers. You've been very helpful, Charlotte said. Run along if you want to see more of the fair. The rat grinned. I'm going to make a night of it, he said. The old sheep was right. This fair is a rat's paradise. What eating and what drinking, and everywhere good hiding and good hunting. Bye-bye, my humble Wilbur. Fare thee well, Charlotte, you old steamer. This will be a night to remember in a rat's life. He vanished into the shadows. Charlotte went back to her work. It was quite dark now. In the distance, fireworks began going off. Rockets scattering fiery balls in the sky. By the time the aerobars and the Zuckermans and larvae returned from the grandstand, Charlotte had finished the web. The word Humber was woven neatly in the center. Nobody noticed it in the darkness. Everybody was tired and happy. Fern and Avery climbed into the dark truck and lay down. They purred the Indian blanket over them. Lurvy gave Wilbur a forkful of fresh straw. The air patted him. Time for us to go home, he said to the pig. See you tomorrow. The grown-ups climbed slowly into the truck, and Wilbur heard the engine start and then heard the truck moving away in low speed. He would have felt lonely and homesick had Charlotte not been with him. He never felt lonely when she was near. In the distance, he couldn't stir near the music of a merry-go-round. As he was dropping off, the sleepy spoke to Charlotte. Sing me that song again about the dung and the dark, he begged. Not tonight, she said in a low voice. I'm too tired. Her voice didn't seem to come from her web. Where are you? Asked Wilbur. I can't see you. Where are you? On your web? I'm back here, she answered, up in the back corner. Why, aren't you on your web? Asked Wilbur. You almost never leave your web. I've left it tonight, she said. Wilbur closed his eyes. Charlotte, he said after a while, do you really think the Zuckerman will let me live and not kill me when the cold weather comes? Do you really think so? Of course, said Charlotte. You're a famous pig and you're a good pig. Tomorrow you'll probably win a prize. The whole world will hear about you. Zuckerman will be proud and happy to own such a pig. You have nothing to fear, Wilbur, nothing to worry about. Maybe you'll live forever. Who knows? And now go to sleep. For a while there was no sound. Then Wilbur's voice. What are you doing up there, Charlotte? Oh, making something, she said. Making something, as usual. Is it something for me? Asked Wilbur. No, said Charlotte. It's something for me, for a change. Please tell me what it is, begged Wilbur. I'll tell you in the morning, she said. When the first light comes into the sky and the sparrows stir and the cows rattle their change, when the rooster crows and the stars fade, when early cars whisper along the highway, you look up here and I'll show you something. I will show you my masterpiece. Before she finished the sentence, Wilbur was asleep. She could tell by the sound of his breathing that he was sleeping peacefully deep in the straw. Miles away at the Arab's house, the men sat around the kitchen table, eating a dish of canned peaches and talking over the events of the day. Upstairs, Evie was already in bed asleep. Mrs. Arab was tucking Fern into bed. Did you have a good time at the fair? She asked and kissed her daughter, who nodded. I had the best time I have ever had anywhere or any time and hour of my whole life. Wow, said Mrs. Zerabar. Isn't that nice? Chapter 19. The Egg Sack. Next morning, when the first light came into the sky and the sparrows stirred in the trees, when the cows rattled their chains and the rooster crowed and the early automobiles went whispering along the road, Wilbur awoke and looked for Charlotte. He saw her up overboard in a corner near the back of his pen. She was very quiet. Her 8 legs were spread wide. She seemed to have shrunk during the night. Next to her, attached to the ceiling, Wilbur saw a curious object. It was a sort of a sack, or cocoon. It was peach-colored and looked as though it was made of cotton candy. Are you awake, Charlotte? He said softly. Yes, came the answer. What is that nifty little thing? Did you make it? I did indeed, replied Charlotte in a weak voice. Is it a plaything? Plaything, I should say not. It is my egg sack, my magnum opus. I don't know what a magnus opus is, said Barbara. That's Latin, explained Charlotte. It means great work. The egg sack is my great work, the finest thing I have ever made. What's inside it? asked Barbara. Eggs? 514 of them, she replied. 514, said Wilbur. You're kidding. No, I'm not. I counted them. I got started counting, so I kept it on. Just to keep my mind occupied. It's a perfectly beautiful egg sack, said Wilbur, feeling as happy as though he had constructed it himself. Yes, it is pretty, replied Charlotte, patting the egg with her 2 front legs. Anyway, I can guarantee that it's strong. It's made of the toughest material I have. It is also waterproof. The eggs are inside and will be warm and dry. Charlotte, said Wilbur dreamily, are you really going to have 514 children? If nothing happens, yes, she said. Of course, they won't show up till next spring. Wilbur noticed that Charlotte's voice sounded sad. What makes you sound so downhearted? I should think you'll be terribly happy about this. Oh, don't pay any attention to me, said Charlotte. I just don't have much pep anymore. I guess I feel sad because I won't ever see my children. What do you mean you won't see your children? Of course you will. We will all see them. It's going to be simply wonderful next spring in the barn cellar with 514 baby spiders running around all over the place.
And the geese will have new sets of goslings, and the sheep will have their new lambs. Maybe, said Charlotte quietly. However, I have a feeling I'm not going to see the results of last night's effort. I don't feel good at all. I think I'm languishing. To tell you the truth, I'm languishing, to tell you the truth. Wilbur didn't understand the word languish, and he hated to bother Charlotte by asking her to explain. But he was so worried he felt he had to ask. What does languishing mean? It means I'm slowing up, feeling my age. I'm not young anymore, Wilbur, but I don't want you to worry about me. This is your big day today. Look at my web. Doesn't it show up well with it? Do you want it? Charlotte's web never looked more beautiful than it looked this morning. Each strand held dozens of bright drops of early morning dew. The light from the east struck it and made it all plain and clear. It was perfect piece of designing and birding. In another hour or two, a steady stream of people would pass by, admiring it, and reading it, and looking at Wilbur, and marveling at the miracle. As Wilbur was studying the web, a pair of whiskers in the sharp face appeared. Slowly, Temperton dragged himself across the pen and threw himself down in the corner. I'm back, he said in a husky voice. What a night! The rat was swollen to twice his normal size. His stomach was as big around as a jelly jar. What a night, he repeated hoarsely. What feasting and caressing, a real gorge. I must have eaten the remains of 30 lunches. Never have I seen such leavings, and everything well ripened and seasoned with the passage of time and the heat of the day. Oh, it was rich, my friends, rich. You ought to be ashamed of yourself, said Charlotte in disgust. It would serve you right if you had an acute attack of indigestion. Don't worry about my stomach, snarled Temperton. It can handle anything. And by the way, I've got some bad news. As I came past the pig next door, the one that calls himself Uncle, I noticed a blue tag on the front of his pen. That means he won first prize. I guess you're licked, Wilbur. You might as well relax. Nobody is going to hang any medals on you. Furthermore, I wouldn't be surprised if Zuckerman changes his mind about you. Wait till he gets hankering for some fresh pork and smoked ham and crisp bacon. He'll take the knife to you, my boy. Be still, Temperton, said Charlotte. You're too stuffed and bloated to know what you're saying. Don't pay any attention to him, Wilbur. Wilbur tried not to think about what the rat had just said. He decided to change the subject. Temperton, said Wilbur, if you weren't so dopey, you would have noticed that Charlotte has made an egg sac. She's going to become a mother. For your information, there are 514 eggs in the peachy little sack. Is this true? Asked the rat, eyeing the sack suspiciously. Yes, it's true, said Charlotte. Congratulations, murmured Temperton. This has been a night. He closed his eyes, poured some straw over himself, and dropped off into a deep sleep. Wilbur and Charlotte was glad to be rid of him for a while. At 9 o'clock, Mr. Airbar's truck roared up into the fairgrounds and came to a stop at Wilbur's pen. Everybody climbed out. Look, cried Fern. Look at Charlotte's web. Look what it says. The grown-ups and the children joined hands and stood studying the new sign. Humber, said Mr. Zuckerman. Now, isn't that just a word for Wilbur? Everyone rejoiced to find that the miracle of the web has been repeated. Wilbur gazed up lovingly into their faces. He looked very humble and very grateful. Fern winked at Charlotte. Lurvy soon got busy. He poured a bucket of warm slops into the trough, and while Wilbur ate his breakfast, Lurvy scratched him gently with a smooth stick. "Wait a minute," cried eagerly. "Look at this." He pointed to the blue tag on Unger's pen. "This pig has won first prize already." The Zuckermans and the Arabers stared at the tag. Mrs. Zuckerman began to cry. Nobody said a word. Then they just stared at the tag again. They just stared at the tag. Then they stared at Unger. Then they stared at the tag again. Lurvy took out an enormous handkerchief and blew his nose very loud. So loud, in fact, that the noise was heard by stable boys over the horse barn. "Can I have some money?" asked Fern. "I want to get out on the midway." "You stay right here where you are," said her mother. Tears came to Fern's eyes. "What's everyone crying about?" asked Mr. Zuckerman. "Let's get busy. Edith, bring the buttermilk." "Edith, bring the buttermilk." Mrs. Zuckerman wiped her head with her handkerchief. She went to the truck and came back with a gallon jar of buttermilk. "Bath time," said Mr. Zuckerman cheerfully. He and Avery slowly poured buttermilk on Wilbur's head and back, and as it trickled down his sides of cheek, Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman rubbed it into the hair and skin. Passerby stopped to watch. Pretty soon quite a crowd had gathered. Wilbur grew beautifully white and smooth. The morning sun shone through his pink ears. "He isn't as big as the pig next door," remarked one bystander, "but he's cleaner. That's what I like." "So do I," said another man. "He's humble too," said a woman reading the sign on the web. Everyone who visited the pig pen had a good word to say about Wilbur. Everyone admired the web. And of course nobody noticed Charlotte. Then a voice was heard on the loudspeaker. "Attention, please," it said. "Will Mr. Homer Zuckerman bring his famous pig to the judges' booth in front of the grandstand? A special award will be made there in 20 minutes. Everyone is invited to attend. Crate your pig, please, Mr. Zuckerman, and report to the judges' booth promptly." For a moment after the announcement, the Arabers and the Zuckermans were unable to speak or move. Then Avery picked up a handful of straw and threw it high in the air and gave a loud yell. The straws fluttered down like confetti into Fern's hair. Mr. Zuckerman hugged Mrs. Zuckerman. Mr. Araber kissed Mrs. Araber. Avery kissed Wilbur. Lurvy shook hands with everybody. Fern hugged her mother. Avery hugged Fern. Mrs. Araber hugged Mrs. Zuckerman up overhead in the shadows of the ceiling. Charlotte crouched unseen, her front legs encircling her egg sac. Her heart was not beating as strongly as usual, and she felt weary and old. But she was sure at last that she had saved Wilbur's life, and she felt peaceful and contented. "We have no time to lose," shouted Mr. Zuckerman. "Lurvy, harp with the crate." "Can I have some money?" asked Fern. "You wait," said Mrs. Araber. "Can't you see everybody is busy?" "Put that empty buttermilk jar into the trunk," commanded Mr. Araber. Avery grabbed the jar and rushed to the truck. "Does my hair look all right?" said Mrs. Zuckerman. "Looks fine," snapped Mr. Zuckerman, as he and Lurvy set the crate down in front of Wilbur. "You didn't even look at my hair," said Mrs. Zuckerman. "You're all right, Edith," then said Mrs. Araber. "Just keep calm." Timberton, asleep in the straw, heard the commotion and awoke. He didn't know exactly what was going on, but when he saw the men shoving Wilbur into the crate, he made up his mind to go along. He watched his chance, and when no one was looking, he crept into the crate and buried himself in the straw at the bottom. "All ready, boys?" cried Mr. Zuckerman. "Let's go." He and Mr. Araber and Lurvy and Avery grabbed the crate and boosted it over the sides of the pen and up into the trunk. Fern jumped aboard and sat on the top of the crate. She still had straw in her ear and looked very pretty and excited. Mr. Araber started the motor. Everyone climbed in, and off they rode to the judges' booth in front of the grandstand. As they passed the Ferris wheel, Fern gazed up and wished she was more in topmost car with Henry Fussy at her side. Chapter 20. The Hour of Triumph. Special announcement, said a loudspeaker in the pompous voice. The management of the fair takes great pleasure in presenting Mr. Homer R. Zuckerman and his famous pig. The truck bearing this extraordinary animal is now approaching the infield. Kindly stand back to give the trucks room to proceed. In a few moments, the pig will be unloaded in the special judging ring in front of the grandstand, where a special award will be made. Will the crowd please make way and let the truck pass? Thank you. Wilbur trembled when he heard this speech. He felt happy but dizzy. The truck crept along slowly in low speed. Crowds of people surrounded it, and Mr. Arabram had to drive very carefully in order not to run over anybody. At last he managed to reach the judge's stand. Avery jumped out and lowered the tailgate. I'm scared to death, whispered Mrs. Zuckerman. Hundreds of people are looking at us. Cheer up, replied Mrs. Arabram. This is fun. Unload your pig, please, said the loudspeaker. All together now, boys, said Mr. Zuckerman. Several men stepped forth from the crowd to help lift the crate. Avery was the busiest helper of all. Tuck your shirt in, Avery, said Mrs. Zuckerman, and tighten your belt. Your pants are coming down. Can't you see I'm busy, replied Avery in disgust. Look, cried Fern, pointing. There's Henry. Don't shout, Fern, said our mother, and don't point. Can I please have some money? Asked Fern. Henry invited me to go on the Ferris wheel again, only I don't think he has any money left. He ran out of money. Mr. Harper opened her handbag. Here, he said. Here's 40 cents. Now don't get lost, and be back at our regular meeting place by the pig pen very soon. Fern raced off, ducking and dodging through the crowd in search of Henry. The Zuckerman pig is now being taken for his crate, boomed a voice of the loudspeaker. Stand by for an announcement. Temperton crouched under the straw at the bottom of the crate. What a lot of nonsense, muttered the rat. What's a lot of fuss about nothing? Over the pig pen, silent and alone, Charlotte rested. Her two front legs embraced the egg-stack. Charlotte could hear everything that was said on the loudspeaker. The words gave her courage. This was her hour of triumph. As Wilbur came out of the crate, the crowd clapped and cheered. Mr. Zuckerman took off his cap and bowed. Lurvy pulled his big handkerchief from his pocket and wiped the sweat from the back of his neck. Avery knocked in the dirt by Wilbur's side, busily stroking him and showing off. Mrs. Zuckerman and Mrs. Arabar stood on the running board on the truck. Ladies and gentlemen, said the loudspeaker, we now present Mr. Homer R. Zuckerman's distinguished pig. The fame of this unique animal has spread to the far corners of the earth, attracting many valuable tourists to our great state. Many of you will recall that never-to-be-forgotten day last summer when the writing appeared mysteriously on the spiderweb in Mr. Zuckerman's barn, calling the attention of all and sundry to the fact that the pig was completely out of the ordinary. This miracle has never been fully explained, although learned men have visited Zuckerman's pig pen to study and observe the phenomenon. In the last analysis, we simply know that we are dealing with supernatural forces here, and we should all feel proud and grateful. In the words of the spider's web, ladies and gentlemen, this is some pig. Wilbur blushed. He stood perfectly still and tried to look his best. This magnificent animal, continued the loudspeaker, is truly terrific. Look at him, ladies and gentlemen. Note the smoothness and whiteness of the coat. Observe the spotless skin and healthy pink glow of ears and snout. It's a buttermilk, whispered Mrs. Arabur to Mrs. Zuckerman. Note to the general radiance of the animal. Then remember the day when the word radiant appeared clearly on the web. Whence came the merry, mysterious writing? Not from the spider. We can rest assured of that. Spiders are very clever at weaving the web, but needless to say, spiders cannot write. Oh, they can't they? Murmured Charlotte to herself. Ladies and gentlemen, continued the loudspeaker, I must not take any more of your valuable time. On behalf of the governors of the fair, I have the honor of awarding a special prize of $25 to Mr. Zuckerman, together with a handsome bronze medal suitably engraved in token of our appreciation for the part played by the pig. This radiant, this terrific, this humble pig, in attracting so many visitors to our great county fair. Wilbur had been feeling dizzier and dizzier through the long, complimentary speech. When he heard the crowd begin to cheer and clap again, he suddenly fainted away. His legs collapsed, his mind went blank, and he fell to the ground unconscious. What's wrong? Said the loudspeaker. What's going on, Zuckerman? What's the trouble with your pig? Avery was kneeling by Wilbur's head, stroking him. Mr. Zuckerman was dancing about, fanning him with his cap. He's all right, cried Mr. Zuckerman. He gets the spurs. He's modest and can't stand praise. Or we can't give him prize to a dead pig, said the loudspeaker. It's never been done. He isn't dead, hollered Zuckerman. He's fainted. He gets embarrassed easily. Run for some water, Lurvy. Lurvy sprang for the judge's ring and disappeared. Templeton poked his head from the straw. He noticed that the one end of Wilbur's tail was within reach. Templeton grinned. "I'll tend to this," he chuckled. He took Wilbur's tail in his mouth and bit it, just as hard as he could bite. The pain revived Wilbur. In a flash, he was back on the feet. "Ouch!" he screamed. "Hooray!" yelled the crowd. "He's up! The pig's up! Good work, Zuckerman! That's some pig!" Everyone was delighted. Mr. Zuckerman was the most pleased of all. He sighed with relief. Nobody had seen Templeton. The rat had done his work well. And now one of the judges climbed into the ring with the prize. He handed Mr. Zuckerman two $10 bills and a $5 bill. Then he tied the medal around Wilbur's neck. Then he shook hands with Mr. Zuckerman while Wilbur blushed. Avery put out his hands and the judge shook hands with him too. The crowd cheered. The photographer took Wilbur's picture. A great feeling of happiness swept over the Zuckermans and the Arabars. This was the greatest moment in Mr. Zuckerman's life. It was deeply satisfying to win the prize in front of a lot of people. As Wilbur was being shoved back into the crate, Lurvy came charging through the crowd carrying a pail of water. His eyes had a wild look. Without hesitating a second, he dashed the water on Wilbur. In his excitement, he missed his aim and the water splashed all over Mr. Zuckerman and Avery. They got soaking wet. "For goodness sake!" bellowed Mr. Zuckerman, who was really drenched. "What ails you, Lurvy? Can't you see the pig is all right? You asked for water," said Lurvy meekly. "I didn't ask for a shower bath," said Mr. Zuckerman. The crowd roared with laughter. Finally, Mr. Zuckerman had to laugh too, and of course, Avery was tickled to find himself so wet, and he immediately started to act like a clown. He pretended he was taking a shower bath. He made faces and danced around and rubbed imaginary soap under his armpits. Then he dried himself with an imaginary towel. "Avery, stop it!" cried his mother. "Stop showing off." But the crowd loved it. Avery heard nothing but the applause. He liked being a crowd in a ring, with everybody watching in front of a grandstand. When he discovered that their There was water left in the bottom of the pail. He raised the pail high in the air and dumped the water on himself and their faces. The children in the grandstand screamed with appreciation. At last, things calmed down. Harper was loaded into the truck. Avie was led from the ring by his mother and placed on the seat of the truck to dry off. The truck, driven by Mr. Araba, crawled slowly back to the pig pen. Avery's wet trousers made a big wet spot on the seat. Chapter 21. Last Day. Charlotte and Wilbur were alone. The family had gone to look for Fern. Temperton was asleep. Wilbur lay resting after the excitement and strain of the ceremony. His middle star hung from his neck. By looking out of the corner of his eyes, he could see it. "Charlotte," said Wilbur after a while, "why are you so quiet?" "I like to sit, sir," she said. "I've always been rather quiet." "Yes, but you seem especially so today." "Do you feel all right?" "A little tired, perhaps, but I feel peaceful. Your success in the ring this morning was to a smart degree my success. Your future is assured. You will live secure and safe, Wilbur. Nothing can harm you now." These autumn days were shortened and grow cold. The leaves will shake loose from the trees and fall. Christmas will come, then the snows of winter. You will live to enjoy the beauty of the frozen world. You mean a great deal to Zuckermans, and he will not harm you ever. Winter will pass, the days will lengthen, the ice will melt, the pasture pond, the song sparrow will return and sing, the frogs will awake, the warm wind will blow again, and these sights and sounds, the smile will be yours in joy. Wilbur, this lovely world, these precious days. Charlotte stopped a moment later. A tear came to Wilbur's eyes. "Oh, Charlotte," he said, "to think that when I first met you, I thought you were cruel and bloodthirsty." When he recovered from his emotion, he spoke again. "Why did you do all this for me?" he asked. "I don't deserve it. I never done anything for you." "You have been my friend," replied Charlotte. "That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what's life anyway? We are born, we live a little while, we die. A spider's life can't help because being something of a mess. With all this trapping and eating flies, by helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift off my life of trifle. Heaven knows anyone's life can stand a little of that." "Well," said Wilbur, "I'm no good at making speeches. I have got your gift for words, but you have saved me, Charlotte, and I would gladly give my life for you. I really would." "I'm sure you would. I thank you for your generous sentiments." "Charlotte," said Wilbur, we are all going home today. The fair is almost over. Won't it be wonderful to be back home in the barn cellar again with the sheep and the geese? Aren't you anxious to get home?" For a moment Charlotte said nothing. Then she spoke in a voice so low Wilbur could hardly hear the words. "I will not be going back to the barn," she said. Wilbur leapt to his feet. "Not going back?" he cried. "Charlotte, what are you talking about?" "I'm done for," she replied. "In a day or two I'll be dead. I haven't even strength enough to climb down into the crate. I doubt if I had enough silk in my spinnerets to lower me to the ground." Hearing this, Wilbur threw himself down in an agony of pain and sorrow. Great sobs racked his body. He heaved and grunted with desolation. "Charlotte," he moaned, "Charlotte, my true friend, come now. Let's not make a scene," said the spider. "Be quiet, Wilbur. Stop thrashing about." "But I can't stand it," shouted Wilbur. "I won't leave you here alone to die. If you're going to stay here, I shall stay too." "Don't be ridiculous," said Charlotte. "You can't stay here. Zuckerman and Lily and John Araba and the others will be back any minute now, and they'll shove you into the crate and away you'll go. Besides, it wouldn't make any sense for you to stay. There would be no one to feed you. The fairgrounds will soon be empty and deserted. Wilbur was in a panic. He raced round and round the pen. Suddenly he had an idea. He thought of the egg sack and the 514 little spiders that would hatch in the spring. If Charlotte herself was unable to go home to the barn, at least he must take her children along. Wilbur rushed to the front of the pen. He put his front feet on the top board and gazed around. In the distance he saw the airboats and the circumvents approaching. He knew he would have to act quickly. "Where's Temperton?" he demanded. "He's in the corner under the straw asleep," said Charlotte. Wilbur rushed over, pushed a strong snout under the rat, and tossed him into the air. "Temperton!" screamed Wilbur. "Pay attention!" The rat, surprised out of the sound sleep, looked first dazed, then disgusted. "What kind of monkey shine is this?" he growled. "Can't a rat scratch a wink of sleep without being violently popped into the air?" "Listen to me!" cried Wilbur. "Charlotte is very ill. She has only a short time to live. She cannot accompany us home because of her condition. Therefore, if absolutely necessary that I take her egg sack with me, I can't reach it, and I can climb. You are the only one that can get it. There is not a second to be lost. The people are coming. They'll be here in no time. Please, 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 Temperton, climb up and get the egg sack." The rat yawned. He straightened his whiskers and he looked up at the egg sack. "So," he said in disgust, "so it's old Temperton to the rescue again, is it? Temperton, do this. Temperton, do that. Temperton, please run down to the dump and get a magazine clipping. Temperton, please lend me a piece of string so I can spin a web." "Oh, hurry," said Wilbur. "Hurry up, Temperton." But the rat was in no hurry. He began imitating Wilbur's voice. "So it's hurry up, Temperton, is it?" he said. "How, how, how. And what thanks do I ever get from these services? I would like to know. Never a kind of word for old Temperton. Only abuse and wisecracks and side remarks. Never a kind word for a rat. Temperton," said Wilbur in desperation, "if you don't stop talking and get busy, I will be lost, and I will die of a broken heart. Please climb up." Temperton lay back in the straw lazily and placed his forepaws behind his head and crossed his knees in an attitude of complete relaxation. "Die of a broken heart," he mimicked. "How touching. My, I notice that it's always me you come to when in trouble, but I've never heard of anything heartbreaking on my account. Oh, no. Who cares anything about old Temperton?" "Get up," screamed Wilbur. "Stop acting like a spoiled child." Temperton grinned and lay still. "Who made trip after trip to the dump?" he asked. "Why, it's old Temperton, who saved Charlotte's life by scaring that airboat boy away with a rotten goose egg. Bless my soul, I believe it was old Temperton who bit your tail and got you back on your feet this morning after you have fainted in front of the crowd. Or Temperton, has it ever occurred to you that I'm sick of running errands and doing favors? What do you think I am? Anyway, a rat of hard works." Wilbur was desperate. The people were coming, and the rat was failing him. Suddenly he remembered Temperton's fondness of food. "Temperton," he said, "I will make you a solemn promise. Get Charlotte's egg sack for me, and from now on I will let you eat first, when Willoughby slaps me. I will let you have your choice of everything in the thaw, and I won't touch a thing until you're through." The rat sat up. "You mean that?" he said. "I promise. I cross my heart." "All right, it's a deal," said the rat. He walked to the wall and started to climb. His stomach was still swollen from the last night's gorge. Groaning and complaining, he pulled himself slowly to the ceiling. He crept along till he reached the egg sack. Charlotte moved aside for him. She was dying, but she still had strength enough to move a little. Then Temperton bared his long, ugly teeth and began snipping the thread that fastened the egg sac on the ceiling. Rubber watched from below. "Use extreme care," he said. "I don't want a single one of those eggs harmed." "Thick in my mouth," complained the red. "It's both the caramel candy." But Temperton worked away at the job, and the man-aged cut the sack adrift and carried it to the ground, where he dropped it in front of Wilbur. Wilbur heaved a great sigh of relief. "Thank you, Temperton," he said. "I will never forget this as long as I live." "Neither do I." "Well, I," said Red, picking his teeth. "I feel as though I didn't sport a thread." "Well, home we go." Temperton crept into the crate and buried himself in the straw. He got out of sight just in time. Lovey and John Araba and Mr. Zuckerman came along at the moment, followed by Mrs. Araba and Mrs. Zuckerman and Avery and Fern. Wilbur had already decided how he could carry the egg sack. There was only one way possible. He carefully took the little bundle in his mouth and held it there on top of his tongue. He remembered what Charlotte had told him, that the sack was waterproof and strong. It felt funny on his tongue and made him draw a bit, but of course he couldn't say anything. But as he was being shoved into the crate, he looked at Charlotte and gave her a wink. She knew he was saying goodbye in the only way he could, and he knew her children was safe. "Goodbye," she whispered. Then she summoned all her strength and waved one of her front legs at him. She never moved again. Next day, the Ferris wheel was being taken apart, and the race horses were being loaded into vans, and the entertainers were packing up their belongings and driving away in their trailers. Charlotte died. The fairgrounds were soon deserted. The sheds and buildings was empty and forlorn. The infield was littered with bottles and trash. Nobody of the hundreds of people that had visited the fair knew that the Gray Spider had played the most important part of all. No one was with her when she died. Chapter 22. A Warm Wind. And so Wilbur came home to his beloved manure pile and barn cellar. His was a strange homecoming. Around his neck he wore a Medal of Honor. In his mouth he held a sack of spider eggs. There is no place like home, Robert thought as he placed Charlotte's 514 unborn children carefully in the safe corner. The barn smelled good. His friends, the sheep and the geese, was glad to see him back. The geese gave him a noisy welcome. Congratulations, they cried. Nice work. Mr. Zuckerman took the medal from Wilbur's neck and hung it in the nail over the pig pen, where visitors could examine it. Wilbur himself could look at it whenever he wanted to. In the day that followed, he was very happy. He grew to a great size. He no longer worried about being carried, for he knew that Mr. Zuckerman would keep him as long as he lived. Wilbur often thought of Charlotte. A few strands of her old web still hung in the doorway. Every day Wilbur would stand and look at the torn, empty web, and a lump would come to his throat. No one had ever had such a friend, so affectionate, so loyal, and so skillful. The autumn days grew shorter. Lurvy brought the squashes and pumpkins in front of the garden and piled them on the barn floor, where they wouldn't get nipped on frosty nights. The maples and birches turned bright colors, and the wind shook them, and they dropped their leaves one by one to the ground. Under the wild apple trees in the pasture, the red little apples lay thick on the ground, and the sheep gnawed them, and the geese gnawed them, and foxes came in the night and sniffed them. One evening, just before Christmas, snow began falling. It covered house and barn and fields and woods. Wilbur had never seen snow before. When morning came, he went out and plowed the drifts in his in his yard for the fun of it. Fern and Avery arrived, dragging a sled. They coasted down the lane and out onto the frozen pond in the pasture. Coasting is the most fun there is, said Avery. The most fun there is, retorted Fern, is when the Ferris wheel stops and Henry and I are in the top car and Henry makes the cars ring and we can see everything for miles and miles and miles. Goodness, sure. I started thinking about that old Ferris wheel, said Avery in disgust. The fair was weeks and weeks ago. I think about it all the time, said Fern, picking snow from her ear. After Christmas and the thermometer dropped to 10 below zero, cold settled in the world. The pasture was bleak and frozen. The cows stayed in the barn and the bleak barn all the time now, except on sunny mornings when they went out and stood in the barnyard in the lee of straw pile. The sheep stayed near the barn too, for protection. When they were thirsty and ate snow, then the geese hung around the barnyard the way boys hang around a drugstore, and Mr. Zuckerman fed them corn and turnips to keep them cheerful. Many, many, many thanks, they always said when they saw food coming. Temperton moved indoors when winter came. His ratty home under the pig throw was too chilly, so he fixed himself a cozy nest in the barn behind the grain bins. He lined it with bits of dirty newspapers and rags, and whenever he found a trinket or a keepsake, he carried it home and stored it there. He continued to visit Wilbur 3 times a day, exactly at meal time, and Wilbur kept the promise he had made. Wilbur let the rat eat first. Then, when Temperton couldn't hold another mouthful, Wilbur would eat. As a result of overeating, Temperton grew bigger and fatter than any rat you ever saw. He was gigantic. He was as big as a young woodchuck. The old sheep spoke to him about his size one day. "You would live longer," said the old sheep, "if you ate less." "Who wants to live forever?" sneered the rat. "And naturally to a heavy eater, and I've got toward satisfaction from the pleasures of the feast." He patted his stomach, grinned at the sheep, and crept upstairs to lie down. All winter, Wilbur watched over Charlotte's egg as though he were guarding his own children. He had scooped out a special place in the manure for the sack, next to a board fence. On very cold nights, he lay so that his breath would warm it. For Wilbur, nothing in life was so important as the small round object. Nothing else mattered. Patiently, he awaited the end of winter and the coming of the little spiders. Life is always rich and steady time when you're waiting for something to happen or to hatch. The winter ended at last. "I heard the frogs today," said the old sheep one evening. "Listen, you can hear them now." Wilbur stood still and cocked his ears. From the pond in shrill chorus came the voice of hundreds of little frogs. "Springtime," said the old sheep thoughtfully. "Another spring." And she walked away. Wilbur saw new land following her. It was only a few hours old. The snows melted and ran away. The stream and ditches bubbled and chattered with rushing water. A sparrow with a streaky breast arrived and sang. The light strengthened. The morning came sooner. Almost every morning there was another new lamb in the sheepfold. The goose was sitting on 9 eggs. The sky seemed wider and a warmer wind blew. The last remaining strand of Charlotte's old web floated away and vanished. One fine sunny morning, after breakfast, Wilbur stood watching his precious sack. He wasn't thinking of anything much. As he stood there, he noticed something move. He stepped closer and stared. A tiny spider crawled from the sack. It was no bigger than a grain of sand, no bigger than the head of a pin. Its body was gray and black stripe underneath. Its leg was gray and tan. It looked just like Charlotte. Wilbur trembled all over when he saw it. The little spider waved at him. Then Wilbur looked more closely. 2 more little spiders crawled out and waved. They climbed round and round on the sack, exploring their new world. Then 3 more little spiders, then 8 and 10. Charlotte's children were here at last. Wilbur's heart pounded. He began to squeal. Then he raced in circles, kicking manure into the air. Then he turned a backflip. Then he planted his front feet and came to a stop in front of Charlotte's children. "Hello there," he said. The first spider said hello, but its voice was so small Wilbur couldn't hear it. "I am an old friend of your mother's," said Wilbur. "I'm glad to see you. Are you all right? Is everything all right?" The little spiders waved their 4 legs at him. Wilbur could see by the way they acted they were glad to see him. "Is there anything I can get you? Is there anything you need?" The young spiders just waved for several days and several nights. They crawled here and there, up and down, around and about, waving at Wilbur, trailing tiny drag lines behind them, and exploring their home. There were dozens and dozens of them. Wilbur couldn't count them, but he knew that he had a great many new friends. They grew quite rapidly. Soon each was as big as a BB shot. They made tiny webs near the sack. Then came a quiet morning when Mr. Zuckerman opened a door on the north side. A warm draft of rising air blew softly through the barn cellar. The air smelled of the damp earth, of the spruce woods, of the sweet springtime. The baby spiders felt the warm updrift. One spider climbed to the top of the fence. Then it did something that came as a great surprise to Wilbur. The spider stood on its head, pointed its spinnerets in the air, and let loose a cloud of fine silk. The silk formed a balloon. As Wilbur watched, the spiders let go of the fence and rose into the air. "Goodbye," it said as it sailed through the doorway. "Wait a minute," screamed Wilbur. "Where do you think you're going?" But the spiders were already out of sight. Then another baby spider crawled to the top of the fence, stood on its head, made a balloon, and sailed away. Then another spider, then another. The air was soon filled with tiny balloons, each balloon carrying a spider. Wilbur was frantic. Charlotte's babies was disappearing at a great rate. "Come back, children," he cried. "Goodbye," they called. "Goodbye, goodbye." At last, one little spider took time enough to stop and talk to Wilbur before making its balloon. "We are leaving here on the warmer updraft. This is our moment of setting forth. We are aeronauts, and we are going out into the world to make webs for ourselves." "But where?" asked Wilbur. "Wherever the wind takes us, high, low, near, far, east, west, north, south. We take a breeze. We go up as we please. Are all of you going? Asked Rupert. You can't all go. I would be left alone with no friends. Your mother wouldn't want that to happen, I'm sure. The air was now full of balloonists, and the bar cellar looked almost as though a mist had gathered. Balloons by the dozens were rising, circling, and drifting away through the air, through the door, sailing off on the gentle wind. Cries of goodbye, goodbye, goodbye came weakly to Wilbur's ears. He couldn't bear to watch any more. In sorrow he sank to the ground and closed his eyes. This seemed like the end of the world, to be deserted by Charlotte's children. Wilbur cried himself to sleep. When he woke, it was afternoon. He looked at the exec. It was empty. He looked into the air. The balloonists were gone. Then he walked beautifully to the doorway where Charlotte's web used to be. He was standing there, thinking of her, when he heard a small voice. "Salutations," it said. "I'm up here." "So am I," said another tiny voice. "So am I," said a third voice. "3 of us are staying. We like this place, and we like you." Burr looked up. At the top of the doorway, 3 small webs were being constructed. On each web, working busily, was one of Charlotte's daughters. "Can I take this to mean," asked Rover, "that you have definitely decided to live here in the barn cellar, and that I'm going to have 3 friends?" "You can indeed," said the spiders. "What are your names, please?" asked Rover, trembling with joy. "I'll tell you my name," replied the first spider, "if you'll tell me why you're trembling." "I'm trembling with joy," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Joy," said the first spider. "What was my mother's middle initial?" said the second spider. "A," said Wilbur. "Then my name is Arania," said the spider. "How about me?" asked the third spider. "Will you just pick out a nice sensible name for me? Something not too long, not too fancy, and not too dumb?" Wilbur thought hard. "Nolly?" he suggested. "Fine, I like that very much," said the third spider. "You may call me Nellie." She daintily fastened her orb line to the next spoke of the web. Wilbur's heart brimmed with happiness. He felt that he should make a short speech on a very important occasion. "Joy, Arania, Nellie," he began. "Welcome to the barn cellar. You have chosen a hollow wood doorway from which to string your webs. I think it is only fair to tell you that I was devoted to your mother. I owe my very life to her. She was brilliant, beautiful, and loyal to the end. I shall always treasure her memory. To you, her daughters, I pledge my friendship forever and ever." "I pledge mine," said Joy. "I did too," said Arania. "And so do I," said Nellie, who had just managed to catch a small gnat. It was a happy day for Wilbur, and many more happy, tranquil days followed. As times went on, and months and years came and went, he was never without friends. Fern did not come regularly to the barn any more. She was growing up, and was cared for to avoid childish things like sitting on a milk store near the pig pen. But Charlotte's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, year after year, lived in the doorway. Each spring there were new little spiders hatching out to take the place of the old. Most of them sailed away on little balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up housekeeping in the doorway. Mr. Zuckerman took fine care of Wilbur and the rest of his days, and the pig was often visited by friends and admirers, for nobody ever forgot the year of his triumph and the miracle of the web. Life in the barn was very good, night and day, winter and summer, spring and fall, dark days and bright days. It was the best place to be. thought Wilbur. This warm, delicious cellar with the garrulous geese, the changing seasons, the heat of the sun, the passage of swallows, the nearness of rats, the sameness of sheep, the love of spiders, the smell of manure, and the glory of everything. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte, although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly. None of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. She was in class by herself. It is not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both. The end.